The Hours After Midnight by Joseph Hayes. Section 1, 213. The phone rang in the darkness. Charles Elgin, not quite awake, rolled over, reached for it, spoke. Then, fully awake, his voice locking in his throat, he listened, unable to interrupt until he heard the disconnecting click at the other end of the line. He was holding a humming telephone. His wife, Helen, flipped on the bed lamp, blinking and murmuring his name. Seeing her husband's frozen face abruptly a stranger's, she glanced at the clock. It was that still hour of the night when the street sounds had totally subsided, when the houses along the curve of the street were dark and silent, when the world had come to its stillest moment. Charles was moving now, throwing off the blankets. His wife stood up, shivering at once, and followed him into the upstairs hall, saw his large but not tall body standing upright in the door of Julie's room. Behind him, light suddenly flooded the room, revealing its usual and annoying chaos. Helen tried to speak, could not find her voice, as she saw Charles slump against the door frame, and only then, like a blow, came the realization that the room was empty. The midnight chill of the house reached Helen's marrow now, as Charles turned, and then, seeing the rage and helplessness and terror in his brown, level stare, Helen fought down the sounds that threatened to break upwards from her chest.
"Charles!"
And by some miracle she had not screamed.
"Charles, tell me. Julie."
He told her then, swiftly, simply, his stunned voice flat and empty. He had not recognized the voice. The man, or perhaps it was a boy as he sounded young, had a slight stutter. He said that Julie was with him. He said that Julie was safe. He said that, so long as Charles and Helen did nothing, Julie would be safe.
"Is that all? Charles, it's not possible. I don't believe it."
Charles watched as her oval, still pretty face clenched. Helen had made up her mind, quickly, firmly, finally. As usual. And in that instant Charles was fleetingly glad, because somehow now the decision had been removed from him.
"If you're not going to,"
Helen said, whipping about and striding into their bedroom. Before he moved, Charles heard her pick up the phone, heard the whir and click of the dial. Then he was in the bedroom, too, next to her, wrenching the phone from her hand, placing it in the cradle, facing her astonishment, listening to his own voice. "He may call back. If the line's busy, he'll know we're phoning the police." Suddenly, then, the amazement on Helen's face enraged him.
"He said we're to tell no one, and we're to go downstairs, open the curtains at the picture window, and sit there."
His voice was harsh and even.
"And that's what we're going to do."
Helen blinked. It was not like Charles to speak that way to her, and it was certainly not like him to give an order like that. At the same time, there was an odd, unyielding glint in his eye that she had rarely seen there. And as if she had now, after all these years of making decisions in the family, no will of her own, she picked up her dressing gown and moved down the half-flight of stairs into the living room. Far off from the immediate sensations, the sharp pine odor, the forlorn look of the unlighted, ornamented Christmas tree in the corner, Charles turning on the lights, drawing back the floor-to-ceiling curtains, exposing the entire room to the street's view. Another part of her mind threatened to erupt through the anesthesia of shock. She was aware that her first impulse had been the proper one. Charles was wrong. Yet there was a flash of warm gratitude in her. Charles had talked on the phone. Charles must know. Charles was handling this. At the time, she was struggling with the visions with which every parent of a child has almost daily to contend, in one way or another. "He said he'd call back in 10 minutes with instructions," Charles was saying. "If we have done nothing until then. Otherwise—" And he let the sentence hang unspoken. Helen was fighting now, digging her nails into the flesh of her hand to keep those fearful visions from taking on, as they inevitably would, the particular shape and form of any parent's deepest and most concealed fears if the child is a girl. Her eyes sought Charles. His gaze was full on her. In that instant, Helen had the impression that she had lived this moment before, somewhere in some other life or dream or nightmare. She found herself bracing for the joyful awakening that would release her into routine reality once again. The word "otherwise" was still echoing in Charles's mind as he stared without really seeing out the steamy window into the darkness. There were patches of snow on the lawn. somewhat soot-stained and ragged-looking now. In the stillness above his own breathing, he could hear a faint wind crackling in the stiff branches of the trees along the sidewalk. No matter how hard he tried to concentrate on something else, though, the voice on the telephone returned.
"She's a pretty doll, Mr. Elgin. You don't want nothing to happen to her. Sit tight."
And behind the voice, a tune was threading itself through Charles's brain, one of those sobbing, insistent, not-quite melodies that were so popular with the young people these days. It was one of Julie's favorites. He couldn't recall the words. 2:16. Love me, please love me. Julie knew the words. The aching sob behind the voice always stirred a strange longing in her, touching some exposed nerve of her being deep down, bewildering her. She was hunched down in the front seat of the warm car which was parked alongside an all-night roadside diner, and the jukebox music reached her even through the closed, clouded windows. She watched the steamy glass door open and saw Nolan emerge. He walked with a slight off-angle slouch, but a jaunty step, ripping open a fresh pack of cigarettes as he climbed into the car with a gust of cold air sweeping in with him. She drew the evening wrap around her bare shoulders as he held his lighter flame to the cigarette between his lips, half grinning at her in that odd, almost contemptuous way he had. She was struck again with the ridiculous incongruity of the whole situation as she frowned, seeing in the flame suddenly the extended, slightly pouting lips, the narrow, carefully guarded eyes, the long, heavy dark hair, the sideburns, and the general smirk of detachment and superiority that seemed forever stamped on his 17-year-old face. In silence, without offering her a cigarette, he zipped up his leather jacket and started the motor of his father's car. She felt oddly embarrassed now, pulling the wrap around her long flowing gown. When you thought about it, the whole evening had been silly. And worse. It was a bitter joke, like the rest of the Christmas vacation. What wasn't a bitter joke, anyway? She might as well play it out to the end and then forget it.
"I don't think it's very polite, Nolan," Julie said, "leaving me sitting in the cold while you phone one of your girlfriends."
Nolan whipped the car onto the highway. He drove the way Julie liked a boy to drive. Fast, carelessly, but with ease and abandon.
"I'm not polite, I guess,"
Nolan said, slurring the words together.
"Nope, not polite."
Then he laughed, an abrupt short burst of mirthless sound as if he knew a joke he wouldn't share, hinting that it was an evil joke, making sure she, everyone, understood that he needed no one to share his joke. Then he turned and looked at her, his eyes narrowing and roaming across her face, and then, blatant in speculation, down her body to her shoes. Julie drew her coat tighter, lifting her chin.
"Take me home, Nolan. I'm cold." "The evening's young,"
Nolan said, and hunched his shoulders over the wheel and bore down on the gas pedal. Those were her words. The evening's young. If it hadn't been for those words spoken about an hour ago, she might not be here now, in this ridiculous situation. Not that she had any fear of Nolan. She could handle characters like him, just as she could handle characters like Phil. Phil had wanted to take her home. It had only been 1 o'clock then, after they had left the dance and parked a while and then dropped into the restaurant east of town. It was more like a roadhouse, really, but Julie had insisted on stopping there for no particular reason, or perhaps because she knew Phil wouldn't want to. And the silly argument had developed over coffee, with Phil reminding her that her parents didn't like for her to stay out later than 1, even on Friday nights, and even when she was with him. It was then that Julie had said the evening was still young, and she didn't intend to leave, all the while remembering how relieved her parents had been when Phil came home from college a week ago. She hadn't really liked the idea that they approved of Phil quite so much. From that time on, simply because, darn it, that was the way she was, she had been studying Phil, seeing him through her parents' eyes, and somehow this view robbed him of some of the gloss and glamour and appeal, making him slightly duller, more ordinary. Of course, she hadn't said this or even hinted at it, because it would only baffle Phil and hurt him, as much as it baffled and hurt her. Instead, she had explained from cold heights that she was not under her parents' thumb as he was under his father's, and if he, Phil, had a little more gumption, or had she said guts, he wouldn't let his father absorb him so completely and take up absolutely all of his time during the brief 2 weeks before Phil had to return to the university. Phil had only shaken his head in that annoying and suddenly possessive way he had adopted, and had used her mother's favorite phrase, "Julie, I just don't understand you." She had then felt the familiar eruption of rebellion through her, the choking, ugly defiance that always left her stranded somewhere between rage and tears and total panic. What always made it so terrible, with her parents and now with Phil, was the way she felt inside, longing to stop, aching tonight to take Phil's slender face between her hands and stop this. Stop it. Stop it. Instead, grasping as always for further insults, floundering, she had had to prove, of course, that all that Phil charged was absolutely true. Hadn't he said she lived on impulse? Hadn't he said she was her own worst enemy, that she lived in defiance? "Grow up," he had said finally. Catching sight of Nolan alone at the bar, feeding dimes into the jukebox and drinking beer, she had leaped up and joined him, turning on Phil and telling him that she had found someone else to take her home, thanks. She remembered now the amazement on Nolan's face, behind the pleased scowl, and the fury on Phil's as, his lips compressing, he turned his back and walked stiffly out. She had instinctively known that choosing a boy like Nolan, with his long hair, sideburns, dangling cigarette, dungarees, would hurt Phil most, and she had stood there, smiling, but longing to cry out, to find a way to run after Phil, but trapped, watching his back. Now he, too, was turning his back on her. Sooner or later, everyone turned his or her back on her. Sooner or later, she drove them all away. Why? Why did she do it? And why couldn't she stop? Nolan was humming the song, "Love Me, Please, Please, Love Me." The car was moving toward the neighborhood of her home, but she saw no rest in sight. It would be another pillow-pounding, restless, tiring night, and tomorrow she would stare ahead at the wreckage of the Christmas vacation that she had thought was going to mean so much. "Love me, please."
"My favorite song,"
she heard herself say.
"Yeah, solid."
Love. It was a joke, too, wasn't it? Because she loved Phil, and she felt nothing but faint curiosity and a mild disgust toward this boy Nolan, whose mind now seemed to be on some distant dream of his own. Yet here she was with Nolan, not Phil. That made about as much sense as everything else. 2:21. Phil Reynolds could not sleep. It had taken him almost an hour to drive home. The roads had been treacherous, icy in unexpected spots. He lay in his bed now in the large, quiet farmhouse. Perhaps he should phone Julie, just to make sure. Sure of what? That she was home? Of course she was home. Then what the devil could he say to her? You could tell her you're sorry, he told himself harshly. You could tell her that you didn't mean to fling those words at her, those accusations. Telling someone like Julie to grow up was like throwing a match into a gasoline tank. If he could only make sure. Maybe if he just slipped carefully down the stairs to the phone in the front hall. Then he heard his father's slippered step in the upstairs hall on the carpeted stairway going down. It was a familiar sound. Phil's heart twisted. His father had developed arthritis, and the pain gnawed like flame in his joints on cold nights. He would sit in a chair gazing over his snow-covered land, possibly until morning. And Phil could not use the phone, not without answering insistent questions. And how could he explain what had happened? How could he explain Julie to his father, who saw only a handsome, cocksure girl who promised to grow into a strong-willed and probably reckless woman? How could he explain her when there was so much he didn't understand himself? Phil sat up and lit a cigarette. Maybe it was time to get a good square look at Julie. At himself and Julie. First, there was Julie's almost pathetic need for love. Hunger, really. And at the thought of it, Phil went weak and hollow inside. Then why did she keep throwing up obstacles? Why did she keep daring you to admit you loved her, daring you to prove it? Maybe because she had come, for some reason, to feel herself unlovable. A lot of damn foolishness. Psych 2, 5th period, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Phil smashed his cigarette out angrily. Well, whatever it was, whatever lay at the root of Julie's starvation, he loved her. And that was that. Even when the damn fool stunt she had pulled tonight rankled in him, he still loved her. Regardless. Because that was love, wasn't it? Without condition, without reservation. To him, that was what it was. Then why'd you let her down tonight by prodding her into that wild, childish stunt with the sideburn kid? And why don't you phone her now and tell her you're sorry? at least make sure she got home all right. 2:25. The phone in the Elgin house was silent. Charles and Helen sat stiffly, not speaking, in full view of the picture window, sometimes turning to peer into the dim and deserted street. The wind, which had been rustling in the winter trees, had now subsided, and Charles was acutely conscious of this fact for no reason at all except that, if he could concentrate on the trivial details, he might be able to pull his mind away from the telephone long enough for it to ring.
"How long has it been?"
Helen asked at last. Without glancing at his watch again, Charles said, 12 minutes.
"The man said 10. You said he said 10 minutes."
"Yes, he did."
"Then—"
Suddenly Charles was standing, smashing a fist into palm, hearing with surprise and relief the gun-crack explosion of crashing flesh. "What do you want me to do? What can I do? Maybe he isn't watching a clock that closely. Maybe he wants to torture us like this. Who knows?" He was standing before her then, feet planted apart. "What do you want me to do?"
"We can't sit here and do nothing."
"We're being watched. Right now." Whirling, he strode to the window, and as he did so, he felt a wild impulse to pick up a chair, hurl it through the plate glass, step outside, shouting. But he broke the impulse and leaned against the window frame, breathing hard, his voice still angry as he spoke. "Who the hell could be watching? Not our neighbors, and there hasn't been a car go by out there since we came downstairs. It's all a trick, some sort of stupid kid trick." He saw Helen reflected against the darkness in the picture window. She stood up behind him, and her chin lifted, reminding him instantly of Julie. The memory was like a cold wind.
"Kid trick? What do you mean by that, Charles?"
"It doesn't make sense," he said, putting it into words at last. "None of it makes sense, that's all."
"You said earlier that the voice might have been a boy's. Certainly not Phil. Phil wouldn't be in on anything like this, but someone else perhaps. Who? You didn't recognize it, did you, Charles? One of Julie's other friends?"
And very slowly, frowning, Charles turned. Helen was standing, head tilted, eyes lighted with hope and relief.
"She was upset and angry enough when she left here tonight,"
Helen was saying then, although Charles only dimly heard the words in his astonishment and mounting anger.
"It would be just like Julie to think up something like this, wouldn't it? Oh, why didn't I think of that myself?"
Charles stepped to her, taking her arms in his hands. "Listen," he said. "Listen to me. Julie didn't think this up. Julie's in trouble, Helen. You can't blame her for this. That's what you want to do. God knows why. It's what you always do. But she needs us now. She's not playing any jokes, and this isn't a joke either. Do you understand me, Helen?" Helen's eyes were locked with his. She didn't move.
"Then why won't you call the police? If this is a criminal gang, what can we do against them without help?"
"We can't take that chance, Helen. That could mean Julie's life." But at this, Helen shook her head slowly.
"You don't believe it's a criminal, Charles. Deep in your heart, all along, even if you won't admit it, you've been afraid it was one of Julie's crazy stunts."
Charles pushed Helen away and strode across the room. The rage was high and sour in his throat now. Rage at Helen, at Julie, at the voice on the phone, at himself. But finally he turned to her again. "All right, it doesn't make sense. It did sound like a young boy's voice, but damn it, that doesn't mean it's not serious. I'm not saying it is or isn't a kid's trick or joke. I'm saying more wild, destructive things are done by young people today than by hardened criminals. That's what frightens me. What you'd like to think occurred to me, yes. But what if that's not true? What if it is some gang of crazy kids, the kind who beat up old people in the street, start riots in theaters, try to run you off the road with their motorcycles? Then what? You tell me. Then what? What happens to Julie? That's all I care about. What happens to Julie?" There was a throbbing silence. Abruptly then, Helen sagged. Charles reached her, held her, lowered her to the sofa, then sank down beside her, holding her head against his chest as, every muscle clenched and leaping, he stared into the empty street.
"I do love her, Charles," Helen was whispering. "It's not that I don't love her. Surely you understand that."
Charles only nodded, knowing then that Helen, like himself, was remembering the incidents of the early evening. It had been much like many other evenings, and afternoons, and Sundays, Julie had put on her new gown and come downstairs to be admired, not rushing into the living room with confidence, but standing hesitant on the steps, her eyes clouded but also glittering with pleasure. Charles had seen her first, lowering his paper, making a great commotion over the gown, and Helen had turned off the television, pleased, happy, almost gay. There had been a lot of women's talk then, the fit, the lines, the hymn, the two voices mingling pleasantly and warmly. And then Helen and Julie, like two excited sisters, had gone up the stairs together. It had been some minutes later that he had heard the lifted voice, the mounting tension in it, and had sat listening, his throat closing in an old misery as the dissension grew, filling the house. But there were no tears. There were never tears. It was very strange, he often thought, how similar the two women, his two women, were. Neither would, out of pride or stubbornness or God knows what, allow herself to be reduced to tears. Afterwards, then, there was the slamming of Julie's door and Helen's straight-backed but somehow pathetic retreat down the stairs. The pattern made Charles weak and sad. What could he do? What was there to do? There was, first, the tendency to blame Helen. She was, after all, adult, and she should be able to hold her temper. But that was unfair, and Charles knew it. Helen's anger itself was only a retreat, as perhaps only he knew, a distillation of complex reactions, or an evasion of the complexity. Charles had learned from 20 years of marriage that his wife's abrupt bursts of wrath concealed many other conflicting emotions. But how could he explain this to a 17-year-old child? And it had not been difficult for Helen to convince him that she had some right to her anger after all, just as a few minutes ago now Helen had been able to make him admit, however grudgingly, that Julie might herself be involved in that phone call. Certainly what had triggered the clash in the bedroom in the early evening had been small in itself. The room was in a state of complete chaos. Again. But did Julie leave it this way? In fact, create this chaos herself, perhaps even unconsciously, simply in order to get attention, whether loving or condemning? Charles had read many times that there were reasons behind the baffling behavior of young people today. Each article in magazine or newspaper created or pounced upon a different reason. Had Julie been born with this rash sense of defiance in her nature? He didn't know, but once again he had tried, after the upstairs quarrel which left Helen stiff and trembling with mingled emotions, to explain that since childhood Julie had been demanding attention, crying, "Look!" He recalled for Helen familiar scenes. Julie at 5, perched precariously on a high, uncertain limb of the oak on her grandfather's farm, crying down, "Look at me, look!" One way or other Charles had explained to Helen. She had been yelling "look" ever since. And Helen, knowing this herself, had asked whether, because of this, she should let Julie get away with anything she tried to get away with. In other words, not train her at all for life and marriage in her own home. Charles had been trapped then, in a familiar and painful dichotomy. "What am I to do?" Helen had demanded. "I try to hold my temper, but she makes sure I don't. You may be right, Charles. It may only be her way of getting attention, any kind of attention. But it's making me a nervous wreck. And Julie, too. What am I going to do?" And Charles did not have the answer. The question went to the heart, and the answer seemed locked in some far-off and deep-down mystery that determined how each of them would act, no matter what they might think of their own actions, and no matter how much they wanted to control them. Filled with growing hopelessness, Charles had gone upstairs to Julie's room. He had found her stretched out across the bed, still, her eyes dry as she turned, sat up, stared with squared jaw and lifted chin, challenging him. And in that instant he did blame her, hotly, completely. And as he relaxed, he knew that also was unfair. Julie had waited for Charles to join Helen in his condemnation. Aware of this trap, he refrained, reached for the genuine tenderness he felt, probed quietly, sitting on the bed. And then Julie, sitting stiffly as though afraid to collapse from her reserve completely, had said humbly, looking away, her young face open and vulnerable and hurt from within, "I lie awake at night and try to figure it out. Why am I like that? Why do I do all the things that I know will upset her? And you too, I guess. I try and try to figure it out, till I ache and can't sleep. Why do I get so angry, and why at her? And you, I can't seem to do anything about it. Why am I so mixed up all the time?" Again Charles had had no answer, but he had experienced a faint glimmer of hope. Then, awkwardly in relief, he He had said something about the two of them being very much alike, Julie and her mother, and he thought that Julia was taking a first step by accepting some responsibility. Julie had stood up, her shoulders squaring, her hands at her hips, her eyes glittering blue.
"You're just like her. You're against me, too. No matter what I do, it's not right. It can't be right."
Then, hearing the front door open and the sound of Phil's voice downstairs, she had stopped a moment, flinging on her white evening wrap, while Charles tasted the dry defeat in his mouth. Julie was whispering then as she opened the door.
"We can't all be perfect, and I'm sick of trying."
A lovely young stranger, almost a woman. She had gone out without closing the door, and Charles had stood there a long moment until there was silence below, struck by the complexity and entanglement of any family relationship, and despair had touched his heart like a shadow. The memory of that scene as he sat holding Helen against him on the sofa had allowed the minutes to tick away unnoticed. He glanced at his watch. 2:32. Almost 20 minutes had passed since the first call. 20 minutes when the man, or boy, had said 10. He felt Helen stir. Then he heard her voice.
"What does she want me to do, Charles? What more can I do? She must know I love her."
But Charles had moved through and past that problem now. He stood up. 20 minutes. He fought down the hope that perhaps it had only been a disturbing trick, now over, with some kid laughing about it now with no intention of calling back. He fought down the hope because his mind had leaped to another possibility. What if someone did have Julie, and something had gone wrong, through no fault of his, perhaps even through Julie's own quick-triggered anger? Then what? What would they do to Julie? He was pacing the floor, but he stopped that, feeling Helen's eyes on him, and sank into the chair next to the Christmas tree. He must not alarm Helen. He heard himself chuckle. Then he heard his own voice. "I think you were right, dear. It was probably just a trick. Julie will come walking in any minute. You wait and see." His words sounded as hollow as his tone.
"I'm going out of my mind if that phone doesn't ring," Helen said. "I wish Rod were here. He'd know what to do."
Charles was startled. Rod? In the last half hour, Charles had not once thought of his son.
"Rod," Helen was saying softly, "would probably want to rush out and find her himself and kill somebody."
Startled, Charles said nothing, but gazed in fascination at his wife. What good would rushing out now, beginning a one-man search of the town? What could that accomplish? And as he realized this, he was struck with another strange emotion. Helen had implied with admiration that Rod would or could somehow accomplish more than Charles himself was accomplishing. Charles would not acknowledge that it was jealousy that moved hotly through his blood now, but in the misty back region of his mind there was an odd stirring. He recalled Julie's words erupting just before she left. "We can't all be perfect, and I'm sick of trying." And for the first time, sensing but rejecting his own resentment, he felt that dimly as from a distance he understood something about Julie. But the cloudiness of the feeling, his mind was too charged and occupied to focus it, only added to the hopeless confusion. Helen stood up, her chin lifting, her mouth setting.
"We've got to know," she said.
She was always prettiest when she was angry, and Charles felt suddenly giddy thinking of this now.
"I can't stand it, Charles. Get the police."
"Whoever it is," Charles said softly, "we don't want to panic them. It's been 20 minutes since they called. I'll give them 20 more minutes. Then, if there's no word, we'll phone Phil and, if necessary, the police."
"You admitted you thought it was a hoax, darling. I don't see why we should put ourselves through this for 10 more minutes. It's apparent no one could be watching us, and unless he were to call back while we were on the phone and get a busy signal."
But then she stopped talking, rooted. Charles, his breath stopped, turned his head slightly toward the window, but in time to see a dark green sedan move slowly to the curb in front of the house, slowing almost to a stop, but not quite, the tires spinning noisily as it picked up speed. Helen did not turn from the window. Charles could not move. "That wasn't Phil's car," he said at last. Helen said,
"No."
Then they looked at each other. "I still say 20 minutes more," Charles said. "No longer." Why 20 minutes? He didn't know. But you had to draw a line somewhere. End of Section 1. Section 2. 236. From inside the car, Nolan had seen the lighted window, the curtains drawn back, the two still figures. They were playing it his way. He slowed down at the curb, almost stopping. Then he hit the gas and sped on. Let them know he was on the job. Don't let them get the idea that just because he was late in calling back, he didn't mean business. He felt gay, powerful, sure of himself. "You passed my house," Julie said, her tone somewhere between a question and an accusation. "Got a present for you at my house," Nolan muttered. There was a high-running, throat-stopping excitement in his chest. "Get you right back here. You know where I live, don't you?" "I don't want a present," Julie said, and she had not taken her eyes from him. "Turn around." It went through Nolan's mind then that this was the time and place to stop. If he turned around now, he wouldn't have to go through with it. He wouldn't have to keep thinking and thinking about the next moves, most of which he hadn't yet doped out, at least not all the way. When he had made the phone call shortly after the first part of the scheme occurred to him, for no reason at all, really, except that she was with him and it was one way of pulling something off, really showing them all, he hadn't had any idea where he would go from there, how he would carry it out, or even if he would for sure. Now he was even more undecided. He was still trying to latch onto something to say when he called back. And he was still bathed in the pleasure that his own voice on the phone had given him. The old guy was squirming, wasn't he? And every minute that passed, he was squirming more. Nolan had him where he wanted him. Had her, too. Julie Elgin. Of all people. Julie Elgin. Best-looking doll around, always had been. He had had his eye on Julie Elgin for years now. Through high school, and then during the summer when he was working at Lake Club, and she'd be up there more than half the time, swimming and dancing and playing tennis. He had watched her with the others, too, in their father's cars and in their own shiny convertibles. The ones from town, and the ones who came from the city for the summer, all of them swarming around Julie, who always went her own way, head in the air. He had watched her move. She had the best-looking body he had ever seen. Ever. And a sort of hunger had set in. Not that he needed Julie Elgin. He could have plenty of girls, all kinds, and some of them the Lake Club gang, too, if the truth was known. Only none just like Julie. He might as well admit it. He knew how to handle her, too. Just give him a chance. He had seen her in action with the others. He knew. "Not scared, are you, Julie?" He watched her eyes harden, then saw them crinkle into almost contemptuous smile that made him go weak in the stomach. "That'll be the day," she said. Nolan turned down the street leading to his father's drugstore. He parked in the dimness of the street alongside and climbed out. "It's only 7 blocks back to your house," he said. "You can walk if you don't want to wait." He turned his back on her and let himself in the side door of the dark store. Then, with a high-thin excitement running through him, more powerful than any whiskey he had ever had, he stopped, glanced back from inside. She had not moved except to slump farther down in the seat of the car. Something caught in his throat and his chest swelled to bursting. She had had her chance, he thought. She had made the decision herself. Whatever happens now, it's her fault. Then, stealthily, without turning on any light, he moved cat-like through the store and into the small apartment in the rear where he lived with his father. 238. In the car, Julie thought of the 7 cold blocks. She couldn't walk. Matter of pride. Typical, Phil would say if he knew. But he needn't know. She flipped on the car radio. She couldn't let this sideburn kid named Nolan Stoddard think she was scared of him either, could she? Julie had an instinctive knowledge of why the boys like Nolan dressed as they did, combed their hair as they did, rode their motorcycles as they did. It was just another way to defy, to challenge, to assert themselves. Julie didn't happen to care for Nolan's type or his way of doing things, but she understood him all right. What parents wanted was for their children to grow up and act and talk and think just like they did. Well, it wasn't the same now, for a lot of reasons, as Julie had tried to make them understood. But that was hopeless, too. Sometimes she had the lost, deserted feeling that everything was really pretty hopeless. Mother would tense and grow angry. And Dad, well, he'd try to be reasonable, try to walk a thin line between, reaching for a way. But let's face it, he was weak. When Julie married, she'd marry a man, a real man, someone who'd dominate his home. She almost laughed. It was crazy sometimes, the thoughts that went through your head. She remembered the lights burning in the living room. Let them wait a few minutes longer. Let them worry. Do them good to worry about me for a change. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the way it often did, a bitter compunction swept over her. She felt a swift impulse to leap from the car, run home, reassure them, take them into her arms. She felt for an instant that, for no reason at all, she was just going to burst into tears, which was really a laugh. Julie didn't cry. Cry? That was a funny one. The music from the radio welled up. Love me, please, please love me. The song was everywhere lately. It seemed to have moved into the bloodstream of almost everyone she knew. Except, perhaps, Phil. No, not Phil. And probably not Rod. They didn't respond. Why? It struck no chord. Well, lucky them. Lucky them, and to hell with it. She began to sing softly. 2:39. Inside, Nolan had reached the chest of drawers in the bedroom when he heard his father turn over in bed, mumbling in his sleep. Nolan froze. Then his father settled down again. The room was quiet and dark. But Oscar Stoddard was not asleep now. He waited only a moment as he heard the drawer open. Then he was up and hurling his small, thin body at the figure's back. There was a crash as a lamp tumbled, and Oscar had no sooner grabbed the leather jacket than he realized that it was not a burglar but Nolan, his son. "Well, I'm damned," he said, panting heavily and reaching for the wall switch. "What are you up to?" When he saw Nolan's face in the sudden flare of light, though, he knew at once. He fought down his quick fury. "That's a good way to get killed, son," he said, fumbling for his glasses. "By you?" Nolan said, and his lips twisted in that way that worked on Oscar's nerves. "Yes, damn it, by me," Oscar growled. "You know how much money I got in here on Saturday night? Wouldn't be here either if you'd gone to the bank yesterday afternoon way you were supposed to. How'd I know it was you in the dark? What do you want anyway?" He knew, of course, and asking was only a faint hope which shattered with the click sound of the knife. Oscar didn't need to look at it. "It's mine," Nolan said. "It was yours," Oscar corrected. "I told you when I took it I was going to keep it." Then his voice became plaintive as his inner bewilderment mounted. What do you want to do with a thing like that anyway, Nolan? I told you I'd pay you for it. I told you... But Nolan had started for the door to the drugstore. Oscar reached out, grabbed his shoulder, spun him around. The plaintive note was gone now. "You'll do what I say, hear me? You're my son, damn it, and I say you don't go around town carrying one of those." But Nolan only stared, one shoulder lifted, the knife dangling between his fingers, open. "Put it back!" Nolan uttered a single word obscenity. Oscar's arm moved so fast it could not be seen. The sound of his palm against Nolan's jaw was like a pistol shot. Nolan gripped the knife. He uttered the obscenity once again, then moved. He was out of the room like a shadow. His hard leather heels clumped across the floor of the store. Oscar ran after him, pleading now, tasting his contrition on his tongue, struggling with his fury. He reached the side door as it closed, then he stood leaning against the plate glass door, sick all the way through. He saw Nolan climb into the car, Oscar's green sedan, and he saw it pull away, the tires spitting. In that instant, he thought he saw, but could not be sure, the head of a girl inside the car. One of the tramps he pals around with, Oscar thought bitterly. "What can I do?" he asked himself in anguish. "What have I done to deserve this? What the hell can a man do?" And then, suddenly cold, feeling ridiculous and alone, and pushing at the breathless fear that was moving in his chest, he murmured aloud in pain, "What's gonna become of him? What can I do for him? What's coming next?" 2:43. Nolan whipped the car around the corner. "That does it," his mind was repeating. "That does it. Now I'll show him. Now I'll go through with it." His face was stinging hot. He lit a cigarette without glancing at Julie beside him. His foot eased down on the gas pedal, and it was then that he caught sight of the police car. His foot pressed down, his leg muscles cramping, his chest swelled. He could not quite breathe. Old man Elgin did it. He went to the cops. He thought you were bluffing. And in that instant, frozen, the car continuing at a normal rate of speed, his eyes glued on the rearview mirror, Nolan became conscious of the knife in his pocket, conscious of its weight and power and sharpness and intent. Old Man Elgin double-crossed you, he told himself, as the distance between his car and the police car became greater. Could you go through with it if you had to? Were you bluffing? Nolan was breathing again, as he realized that he was not being followed, that the prowl car was only on routine duty. He turned a corner, this time listening for the faint screech of protesting tires. The car hit a slick spot and skidded slightly, but Nolan was pleased. In the few minutes since he had left the drugstore, he had learned something about himself. He could kill her. If Old Man Elgin tried a double-cross, if he brought the police in, Nolan would do exactly what he had threatened to do.
"You're going the wrong way,"
Julie said. Nolan glanced at her. This was a real gone doll, and proud. Too proud to admit she was scared, with the car picking up speed and going in the opposite direction from her house. Only she wouldn't show it. Not this one. He'd fix that, too. Before he was through, she'd show it all right. He'd have her begging. His foot pressed to the floorboard, and he felt Julie straighten in the seat. He glanced at her profile. He'd have her crying and begging. A new excitement surged through him. Yes, he could, if necessary, go through with it. And he was considering, with obscene delight, the idea of the knife plunging.
"Stop the car," Julie said. "I'm getting out."
Nolan heard himself laugh, and the sound of his own laughter returned him to the reality of the moment, the speeding car, the unlikely fact that Julie Elgin was beside him in the car, the phone call he had promised to make. And what could he say now? He slowed down. Phew, that had been close. Why, he had even thought he could kill Julie. He had no intention of killing anyone. He felt the excitement ebb and a coldness set in. It's thinking like that leads to trouble, he told himself. Real trouble. He slowed down, a little weak. He wouldn't have to hurt anybody. It was only a trick, wasn't it? He could feel the sweat beating on his forehead. It hadn't started out to be anything serious. If everybody played ball, it wouldn't be. Then why don't you take her home? Why don't you turn around?
"You ever been out this late before?"
Nolan asked.
"Many times," Julie said, "but not with crazy people."
And that did it. Crazy, was he? Her defiance excited him. Caught somewhere between pain and rage, he realized exactly what he was going to do now. He hadn't thought of it before, but now the plan dropped into his mind. Complete, full-blown. Well, complete except for a few little details. His old man wouldn't give him the dough so he could leave town. "You think I'm going to help you dodge the draft," the old man had said. Well, now he'd get the dough his own way. But what made the scheme perfect, the astonishing and satisfying and impossible to conceive part of it, was that he'd get the dough from his own father. The same dough the old man had refused to hand over, and he'd wind up with the money and the car, too. And he'd never get caught. He'd be free.
"Where do you think we're going?"
Julie asked.
"Gotta find a phone booth," Nolan said. "Gotta make a call to a friend of mine."
He laughed again. He was feeling much better now. It would all turn out great now, because when it was over, the police wouldn't even be interested in finding him. Or maybe, if Old Man Elgin and his old man played it right, they would never know. The old man would be scared of a scandal. You always got to think of the business. Afterwards, all Nolan would have to do would be to make sure the army didn't catch up with him, and he'd have the dough to do that. That was all it took. Dough and getting away. Being out of the army, that'd be part of the enormous joke. And the old man would spend the rest of his life looking back and thinking, if only I'd let him have the money in the first place. God, he had to find a phone booth, soon, before Old Man Elgin sweated too much and maybe got reckless. It'd been more than half an hour since the first call. Wouldn't want Elgin to get too worried. Just enough. 2:53. It was the ringing of a telephone which awakened Phil Reynolds from a surface sleep. Then he sat upright on the bed, at once angry with himself for having drifted into sleep and straining to hear. It took the empty silence of the house to confirm his suspicion. The ringing of the phone had occurred in his drowsing but undreaming mind. He glanced at his watch, thinking how silly he was to worry like this, telling himself even as he stood up that Nolan Stoddard was like all of the others of his kind, not worth fearing. Nevertheless, he was recalling his own limited experience with the Nolan Stoddards of the world. The brash recklessness from the safety of their cars, the scornful curl of the lip, and the carefully unspoken insult of their not challenging glances. Phil was moving down the stairs, softly into the front hall. He had no use for the Nolan Stoddards and very little patience with them. To him, their whole attitude was one of self-pity and weakness. He had the phone in his hand and was dialing before he saw his father stand up in the shadows on the far side of the living room. The house was overheated, and he only hoped his father would say nothing. Then, the sound puncturing the cloud of unrest in his mind, he heard the steady, repeated buzz of the busy signal at the other end of the line. He had replaced the phone before it really occurred to him that it was an odd time of night or morning for the Elgins to be making or receiving a phone call. He did not waste time then, but began paging the phone directory. "Is something wrong?" his father asked without moving. Phil was already dialing again. "I don't know," he told his father, and then he spoke into the phone asking to speak to someone named Nolan. "Thank you," he said, then put the phone down. This time he did not pause, but turned and was mounting the stairs, passing his mother, who had come down a few steps with a sleepy but inquiring expression on her face, when he realized that he had not asked permission, had not asked advice. Right or wrong now, on his own, he was going to do what he knew he had to do. All the while, as he dressed, he felt his heart tightening as he recalled Nolan Stoddard. "Why, if you love her," he demanded of himself, "did you let her drive you off? If she needs proof of love and reassurance, why'd you let your foolish pride come in between?" And as he pulled on a heavy coat, he spoke silently to Julie with savage tenderness. "You little fool, you precious little fool. Why do you always demand so much proof? Can I ever satisfy you, Julie? Can anyone ever meet such a demand?" In the back of his mind, though, he kept hearing that guttural, slurred, arrogant voice with the stutter. 2:55. "So far, so good, Mr. Elgin," the voice was saying, and Charles stood with the receiver pressed hard against his ear, his fist clenched at his side, the muscles of his jaw aching. "Where is my daughter?" It took a long moment for him to recognize the dry, harsh voice as his own. "Is she all right? Listen, whoever you are, if you think—" "Can it, Elgin? Put it on ice. And you listen. Don't get excited and don't start talking to anybody. It's going to be over in no time now. All you got to do is what I tell you now." Silence. Then, "That's better. Yeah, that's better. Okay, here it is." And Charles stood, breathless, listening. Behind him, his wife didn't move. The voice worked on every nerve, and all down his body Charles could feel the scraping of a knife along raw flesh. It was not one man, or even two, the voice explained, starting to talk fast now. It was a gang, and they were working it together, so Charles had better make up his mind he didn't have a chance. The house was being watched. Everything Charles was now to do would be watched too, and the phone, if Charles or his wife tried to make a call on it, that would also be known at once. If any of these things happened, well, Charles could make up his mind to it. He'd never see Julie again. "And even if you did, Mr. Elgin, you wouldn't want to." As he listened, the implications of that last sentence lashing at him and blurring everything else, he had the sudden terrible knowledge that he had been wrong. Helen had been right. He should have called the police at once. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "What do you want?" The voice laughed once, a short blurt of triumph without pleasure. "I want $3,000. Then again, silence. Charles felt relief sweep across his mind, clearing it. The man, or men, wanted money. Only money. And not much money at that. But how was he going to get it now, tonight? "Listen," he said. Listen, this can't go on till morning, and I can't get money tonight. I don't have $100 in the house, and—" "Shut up! You'll get it. Tonight. I'm telling you. Drugstore corner of Spring and El Dorado. He's got the dough in his safe. He knows you." "Mr. Stoddard knows me, sure, but be reasonable. He won't cash a check in that amount, even if I can prove I've got it in the bank." "Then get it, that's all. Get it!" And the voice rose in a shrill, wild animal scream. "Be back in 25 minutes. I'm not playing any game, you bastard. You get it or take what's coming.
3,000. 3,000. I ain't kidding, mister. I'm going to call you again at 25 after 3, and you better have it.
Over the humming of the phone, the voice still resounded in his ear. The insane fury of it, the unrestrained panic and determination. Charles turned slowly to face Helen.
He sounds crazy,
Helen said. Charles nodded and went up the stairs to dress. Exactly. Crazy. And how do you deal with a crazy man? Do you call the police now? Can they deal with a crazy man? When he heard Helen enter, he related the content of the call to her in a dead voice through parched lips.
Why us?
Helen asked, and she was not speaking to him but to the universe.
Why us? Why Julie?
But, pulling on his shirt, Charles was not listening. He was attempting now to deal with something much more immediate and concrete and bewildering, but along the same lines. Why had they chosen him? He was not a wealthy man. He had only slightly more than $3,000 in the checking account. Why not a man with a great deal of money? How far would $3,000 go, split among a gang? There is no gang. How can you be sure? He sounded like a kid. He also sounded, as Helen said, crazy. Now what? What comes next? 2:56. Julie was out of the car and running along the dark highway. The car itself was now parked along the edge of the highway beside a phone booth which was set alongside a darkened service station about a mile out of town. When Nolan, careening along at a crazy speed, had spotted the phone booth, he had slammed on the brakes, twisted the wheel, and leaped out, with only a scornful glance at her. And then, while he was in the shadowy booth talking away, Julie had slipped across the seat of the car, carefully opened the door on the driver's side while she kicked off her shoes, and slithered out, careful to stay on the far side of the car. Now, conscious of her white evening wrap in the darkness, she was running along the deserted highway in the direction of the city limits sign which they had passed only a few minutes before. She held her skirts high, her head plunged forward and down. Her mind was straining to hear the first sound of an approaching car from either direction. If a car approached from the direction of town, she would flag it down and ask for help. If headlights appeared from behind, she would have to decide whether it was Nolan's car and whether she'd face it out with him, or perhaps plunge into the scrubby woods bordering the black cold strip of highway. The grim pavement bit through her sheer stockings at each step, and the soles of her feet were burning. The slight wind was cold and thin, and it cut through her wrap and gown, stinging her flesh. She couldn't seem to get enough air into her lungs, and she could feel her legs slowing down. Why didn't someone, anyone, a truck, a bus, anyone, why didn't someone come along? 2:57. Charles and Helen stood at the front door while Helen knotted a scarf around his neck.
Always Julie, Helen was saying. Rod never seemed to get involved in things like this. Always Julie.
With the doorknob in hand, Charles said, not quite shouting, "You can't blame Julie for this. Forget Rod, will you, for God's sake. Julie's not like Rod. Damn it, Helen, we've both got to stop blaming Julie because she's not Rod." Charles stood, breathing hard, his eyes burning. Why had he said that? Where had that thought come from? His jaw closed tight, a pain climbing along the hardened ridge as he watched Helen's face, the look of profound startlement, then the inevitable hurt in her eyes. Charles went weak and hollow inside. It was as though he had struck her. He leaned over to kiss her, and the suggestion of moisture on her cheek only intensified his tenderness.
"You are going to get help, aren't you?"
she whispered, ignoring the pain that his words had caused.
"You're going to notify the police, aren't you, Charles?"
And this time it was not an order. Her eyes were warm and pleading, and her chin was not lifted and set. Charles could not answer the question. Hadn't he already decided himself to call in the police? He couldn't be sure. Helen's order, changed to a plea, melted him. The gentleness in her eyes numbed his resolve. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps it was the only way. Confusion added to the accumulated misery packed through his body and mind. Charles opened the door and went out without answering. 2:59. Nolan was driving along the highway without lights. His fury was mounting. First, the old guy on the phone, that Elgin. Mr. Stoddard knows me, sure, but be reasonable. He won't cash a check in that amount. Nolan hadn't thought of that. Why the hell hadn't he thought of that? It was this that had made him explode at Elgin on the phone. Now here he was driving along, his eyes probing the bushes and fields and woods alongside the road, and Julie gone. Damn her. Damn her, she won't get away with it. He'd wasted enough time back there at the service station, using his headlights, trying to flush her out, convinced she was hiding around there. Then it had occurred to him that she might try to hike or run back to town. It was this hunch he was playing now. And if he found her, oh God, if he found her now, he'd teach both of them, her and her old man. Because all the time in the back of his mind was this picture that gave him such a wallop. His own old man taking Elgin's check, opening the safe, paying over the money he wouldn't give Nolan, the money Nolan had begged for. Well, he was going to get it now, one way or the other, just so that girl didn't get back home in time to bollocks it all up. Headlights appeared far down the road. They were approaching fast. Nolan bore down on the gas pedal. It was at that moment that he saw the white wrap. She was in the middle of the road, waving her bare arms. Beyond her, he saw the headlights slow down. He leaned over the wheel, reached her before the other car stopped. He threw on his headlights, catching her in amazement, frozen in the middle of the road, only her head turning. He slammed on the brakes, leaped out, fully aware now that he was in view of the other car, which was purring cautiously closer. He approached Julie, who turned to the other car just as it regained speed, and in that brief moment swept past, going fast. Julie faced him defiantly, her fists on hips. That pose. Her breasts thrust forward, her legs planted, the whiteness against the black night. All of it stirred Nolan to a blind, blank rage. He moved closer. She did not turn from him. When he was close, she struck. She hit him full across the face before he could himself move, and then she turned as if to run. He grabbed one hand, clutching her arm, swung her around, and then, poising himself, he hit her once, solidly, with his fist, one blow on the chin, just the way he had seen the movie heroes do it. He had never hit anyone like that before. He watched in fascination as she crumpled on the dark pavement. Then he stooped to pick her up. Her body, when he touched her, was warm and vibrant under the cool sheath of gown. End of Section 2. Section 3. 301.
It was a family argument, Emil Easton told his wife again. I'm telling you, who wants to get mixed up in a family squabble on the highway this time of night? How do you know? His wife asked. How can you decide this without stopping? At least we could turn around and go back and make sure. They were probably drunk, Emil Easton said, tossing out his cigarette. I'd feel like a fool. Well, he certainly didn't care whether we saw him or not, I'll say that. Sure, baby, that's what I said, sure. Brave, right, halfback. What's that got to do with it? That's what I married. Brave, right, halfback. You've had too much to drink. Lord deliver me from brave, right, halfbacks. Lay off, we're almost home. Lay off.
There was a pause. Then Carol Easton said,
Well, now we know, don't we? What do we know? Now we know a lot of things. What do we know? That you're tight? Nope, something else. Something much more important, halfback. Shut up, we're home. You want the sitter to hear you talking like a drunken bum? You take the sitter home, halfback. Let her admire your brawn. Shut up, I said.
302. Charles was walking, his head thrust forward against the biting cold under the familiar trees along the familiar street that, tonight, looked foreign and hostile. Helen's face haunted him. He could not bear to inflict pain. He had, from time to time in his life, felt this quality, this reluctance or inability to be cruel, as a lessening of his manhood, a weakness. Was it because of this that through the years he had been unable to assume the control of his own home that he somehow felt he should assume? Nonsense. Silly thought. Like those words he had found to hurl at Helen, and at himself. Damn it, Helen, we've both got to stop blaming Julie because she's not Rod. From what buried resentment or knowledge had they sprung? And at a time like this, was there any truth in the accusation? He turned a corner onto a dim thoroughfare with shops dark behind glimmering plate glass windows. Only 3 more blocks. He quickened his steps. Well, you couldn't blame Rod himself, certainly. Even the thought of his son, the tall young man with the vitally lighted face, the handsome, sincere smile, the open, loved, and freely loving human warmth that permeated the atmosphere of any room he entered. Even the thought brought a flush of warmth. For no good reason, thinking of Rod, Charles felt reassured, momentarily relieved. But the moment passed and the old confusion took over again. Perhaps it had been unfair to bring Julie into a world that already contained someone like Rod. It was certainly unfair to ask her to compete with him. But is that what Helen had done? Yes. There was always the comparison, spoken or implied, and Charles stood by, tried to make peace with soft words, to heal wounds, unable to rout out and expose the leaping nerve of truth. Unable or too weak. Well, now he had spoken. And what did that mean? Now, when it might even be too late. He saw the drugstore ahead. Now what? He had solved nothing. Was he going to phone the police now? Helen had insisted. What then? Why the reluctance? Because that voice had sounded like a madman's. Who would ask for only $3,000? Either a madman or a desperate man. And what would such a man, or boy, do if the police closed in? He would kill. It was as simple as that. He might kill, anyway, no matter how Charles played along. But if anyone tried to move in, he would kill Julie. Charles knew this, accepted it in his bones, and stopped, leaning momentarily against the stone front of a building, breathing hard, unable to move. 3:04. Because she couldn't fight it off any longer now, Helen had begun to give in to the onslaught of memory herself. She had begun, sitting in front of the lighted window again, to picture in her mind all those horrible scenes of defiance and recrimination and pain and insults between herself and Julie. Her mind then dodged away. What had possessed Charles to say what he had said? Helen herself had never blamed Julie because she was not Rod. Charles couldn't have meant that. He was excited. He didn't really know what he was saying. But then she recalled something else Charles had said once. Was it earlier this evening? It seemed years ago now. He had said, "It's easy to lose someone who's lovable." Well, no one could deny that Rod was lovable, and no one could deny that Julie seemed to go out of her way to convince everyone that she was not. And then, too, Rod had been sick more than Julie. You sit by a sick bed night after night and wonder whether a child will live till morning. You go through what she had gone through that time Rod had been struck by the car in front of the old house on Triangle Street. You live through those days and nights, and perhaps an attachment does set in. You can't help being relieved and happy several years later when he's elected captain of the football team, when even later he's healthy enough to get into the army. Isn't that natural? Even though she had cried, yes, actually wept like a child, when Rod left for camp. And then later, the day he was married, she had wept again. Well, Rod was not like Julie. You could depend on Rod. Julie somehow worked things around until you yourself were the victim of her conflicting nature. Soft one moment, hard and defiant the next, the mood seeming to descend from nowhere. Julie had been sad and depressed last June, the day Rod was married. Then, when she had come into the room and found Helen crying, a wild sort of gaiety had set in. The day had ended with Julie drinking too much champagne. Julie, at age 17, and disgracing the lot of them by her brittle gaiety. No one had ever been able to rouse in Helen quite the same feelings of chagrin and bafflement and dismay, all erupting inevitably in Helen's anger. Over and over she had tried to tell herself what her own father had once said to her, in his most non-professorial tones. "There are a great many things you will never understand, but we can't stop trying. If you get angry and turn your back on what baffles you, you'll end up blind and miserable." Why should all this come back to her now? What had any of this to do with what was happening now? It seemed to Helen unfair and cruel that she should be forced, or should force herself, to remember all that at a time like this. If only Julie was warm enough. If only she was inside some place where there was a fire. If only Helen could be sure that no one had hurt her or touched her, and that Julie herself was not suffering. Helen stood up, her chin lifting and her shoulders squaring as she gazed out the window.
"You'd better not hurt Julie," she heard herself mutter. "Whoever you are, you'd better not. That's all."
3:05. Julie felt that she was swimming upwards through heavy dark clouds. Panic clogged her throat. She heard herself utter a slight groan. Then her eyes opened and she saw the road ahead in the flood of lights, the gleaming hood beyond the windshield, the wild flash of telephone poles as the car plunged on, faster than she had ever traveled. Her face throbbing with a pain that reached deep into her head, Julie turned. Nolan was glancing at her, sardonically, almost contemptuously, with a half-smile on his thick lips. He was not even watching the road. Julie choked down another cry in her throat. She lifted her hand, touched her lips, took it away stained darkly with blood. Her teeth were aching, and for the first time she could feel the fear knotting in her stomach, cold and real. How did this happen? How had she gotten into this? And what was coming? With Nolan's eyes on her, with that pleased and satisfied expression rippling across his brow, Julie sat up straighter, her chin lifting. She felt the hot contempt leap into her own eyes. She felt it bitter on her tongue mingling with the blood.
"Make you feel good to knock out a girl?"
she asked. And when Nolan's face darkened, she felt a certain pleasure. He looked at the road now. Julie heard herself laugh.
"When Phil finds out about this, he'll break every bone in your head, of which there are plenty."
She watched Nolan's lips come together. The cigarette between them tilted, held at an angle.
"You want to know something, Ducktail? You need a haircut. Even then, though, you wouldn't look like a man."
Then, having herself tasted blood, she waited. Finally, Nolan said grimly through clenched teeth, "Just keep talking. Just keep it up."
"I will,"
Julie said, and drew her wrap over her shoulders. Nolan's hand lashed out, tore the wrap away. It was then that she saw the knife for the first time. At first, incredulous, she frowned. She heard the sharp click, saw a metallic flash in the dimness as the car careened toward the edge of the road. She heard the ripping sound as the knife tore through the wrap. Then Nolan whipped the wheel and the car found its path on the pavement. The wrap blade drooped around her bare shoulders. "Don't say anything," she warned herself. "Don't talk now. It's not what you think. It's serious. It's a nightmare, but you've got to believe in it. Don't talk." Nolan said, "You're not blabbing now. Why ain't you blabbing? You want me to tell you why?" His tone was soft. He was again turned toward her, and she could feel his eyes licking like a snake's tongue over her bare shoulders above the evening gown. Suddenly she felt weak and helpless, stripped and without defense. The knife was in his hand, a soft gleam, and all the while, still too stunned to comprehend fully, she heard his slow, slurred, soft tone. "You didn't even know my last name tonight. Been working in my old man's drugstore on the corner for years, and you couldn't even think of my last name. You know that? How come? You want to know how come? 'Cause you never, ever looked at me. You don't even see people like me when we pass. You go past me on the walks at school, plenty of times. Maybe you nod, maybe you don't ever see me. I'm a tree. Yeah, that's what I am, a tree. You don't like my looking at you, Julie? You don't like that, huh? How come? I seen all the others looking. That Phil Reynolds, he does more than look, huh? Going dancing, going swimming. What happened I ever ask you to go swimming with me, Julie? Tell me. What happened? You want to know? I ain't good enough. I'm inside washing the dishes at the club. Or caddying. How come that? Tell me, Julie. How come I ain't good enough? Who says? You say that, Julie? Don't answer, she warned herself harshly. He's dangerous. He's play-acting, but he's dangerous. Don't. I never thought of it before, Julie said, realizing it was the truth. She had never thought of having a date with Nolan Stoddard or any of his gang. But now that I do think of it, she added,
I wouldn't let my pet poodle date you.
This time the back of his hand holding the knife caught her across the face. It was a quick blow, blinding her an instant, and she felt the blood begin to move in her nose. Then Nolan was leaning over the wheel, his foot pressing the gas pedal to the floor. Beneath the pain, and a part of it, Julie felt the awful sense of desertion set in. Who knew? Who cared? She was alone. And all of a sudden, with her whole chest constricting as the car plunged straight down the white-lined center of the dark and deserted highway, she realized that, in some odd way that had tortured her, she had always felt alone. With her father, with her mother in particular, and lately with Phil. Alone. Now the sense of isolation and abandonment was so strong that she went weak and sick clear through, unable even to look at the road, at the flashing blackness of the country woods outside. Above all, she couldn't look at Nolan's face. She closed her eyes. What was his plan? Where were they going now? What was going through that twisted, ugly mind? At that moment, Nolan had forgotten Julie. The second blow had given him a slight release, and he could now think. What if his old man didn't cough up the dough for Elgin? What if? Unless that part of it worked out, where would he be? And you know how hard it is always to pry any dough out of the old man, he reminded himself bitterly. Where would he be then? Where the hell would he be? Well, he'd still have the girl. He stole a glance at her. Her bare shoulders glowed. Her head was thrown back as if to stop the flow of blood from her nose, and her hair tumbled. Just looking at her put the hunger in him. Well, he hadn't come this far without getting something out of it. He'd tell them all that much. Something. They just better come through with that money. That was all he had to say. They just better. 3:07. Mr. Elgin, you said it was sickness. I wouldn't open the store if it wasn't sickness. I thought you had a prescription. Standing in the brilliant white light at the prescription counter, Charles was writing on the face of the check, the pen scratching in the silence of the store. He said nothing. I don't normally cash checks, even in the daytime, unless... And then Oscar Stoddard was staring at the check. $3,000! His voice sounded incredulous. He pushed his steel-rimmed glasses up his nose, and his face twisted into a friendly half-grin. Mr. Elgin, I don't have $3,000 in the store. Why, man, I'd be afraid of burglars' money like that around. Charles met the man's gaze. Stoddard stood unmoving, not touching the check. And in that instant Charles knew that he would have to tell Mr. Stoddard. Helen's face floated in his mind, soft and pleading. You are going to help, aren't you? Charles's confusion faded. He had no choice, did he? But in the chill store he could feel the heat of his body under the heavy coat. His face was sweating. He swallowed, the silence like a din in his ears. He and Mr. Stoddard seemed to be standing facing each other in a vacuum, in a humming nothingness. I have money enough in the bank to cover it, Mr. Stoddard, Charles heard himself say, his voice echoing hollowly through the store. I don't have it, don't you understand? I don't have it. Charles made up his mind, knowing no relief, still aware that for some reason valid to himself he had made up his mind earlier not to do what he was now actually doing. He was writing on the back of the check. Then he shoved the rectangle of paper across the smooth counter again. Mr. Stoddard's sleepy, cautious eyes narrowed as he read the words. He looked up at Charles. He adjusted the steel-rimmed glasses on his nose, blinking, then read the words again. Daughter kidnapped. Notify police. It isn't a large sum after all, Charles said, knowing that what he had meant to convey was not contained in the words. He had meant to say it was a matter of life or death, perhaps. His daughter's life. And therefore any amount of money was inconsequential. It is to me, Oscar Stoddard said, still frowning with a wisp of thin graying hair over his furrowed forehead. Damn it, man, Charles began, then checked himself. In a small voice he said, We're being watched. Mr. Stoddard glanced at the plate glass windows of the store. He swallowed once, then turned on his heel and disappeared into the rear rooms. Charles stood motionless. Were they actually being watched? How many men could afford to risk their lives? For wasn't kidnapping a capital offense in the state now? For a share of $3,000? This question, tormenting despite its growing familiarity now, broke through all the others in his mind. There were too many questions. The mind could handle only a certain number at one time. It was at this moment, staring at the cash register to keep from turning to glance out the windows, feeling the outraged fury and the need to act, to kill. It was at this moment that Charles's eyes focused. Atop the cash register was a framed photograph. Smiling out from it was a thin, sickly-looking woman. Charles recalled that Mrs. Stoddard had died a few years earlier, shortly after the Elgins had moved into the neighborhood, and a boy, perhaps 11 or 12 years old. The boy had a round, pleasant face, and he wore spotless clothes. His hair was neatly clipped close to his head. It took Charles perhaps a full half-minute to realize that this was the same boy who sometimes waited on him behind the soda fountain on the rather infrequent occasions when Charles dropped into the drugstore. Only now, perhaps 5 or 6 years later, the face was hardly recognizable as that of the same person. Now the boy wore his hair long, he sported leather jackets and sometimes cowboy boots, and instead of the smile in the photograph, young Stoddard wore a habitual scowl, his heavy brows drawn together over hard, scornful eyes, and he spoke with a stutter. Charles felt the cold sweat freeze under his arms and down his back. His eyes were riveted to the picture now. It was not possible. His stomach muscles knotted. It was not possible. He tried to recall young Stoddard's name. He reached painfully into memory to try to pluck out the sound of young Stoddard's voice. It was a wild, crazy idea, and he must put it aside. "Drugstore corner of Spring and El Dorado," the voice on the phone had said. "He's got the dough in the safe. He knows you." When Mr. Stoddard returned and handed him an envelope across the counter, Charles found himself taking it automatically, shoving it into his overcoat pocket. "You better take a sedative of some sort, Mr. Elgin. You don't look well." How's your son, Mr. Stoddard?" "My son." I forgot his name. Is he home?" "Nolan? Nolan, you mean? Why do you ask that, Mr. Elgin? Nolan?" "Is he home?" Charles asked, glancing at his watch. He would have to walk home in 5 minutes. It wasn't humanly possible without running. "Nolan's home," Oscar Stoddard said. "Sure. Asleep. He's all right. And everything's going to be all right for you too, Mr. Elgin." Charles turned, his mind numb with a strange relief, and walked out. The cold air struck like a blow. That boy. It was only that boy. Mr. Stoddard had been lying. It was that boy with Julie. A boy like that? He would not hurt anyone. Probably knew Julie all through school. Why, a kid like that. But walking, his head down, he missed a step. He was not sure whether it was ice on the sidewalk or his memory that caused the slip.
"Then get it, that's all. Get it! I'm not playing any game, you bastard. You get it or take what's coming."
The wild hysteria of that voice sounded like a shout in Charles's ear. The insane panic. And then Helen's words.
He sounds crazy."
Charles went weak. He stumbled. And through his mind raced a vision of a sick and horrible world in which the most unbelievable crimes were committed by young people. He recalled the stories in the newspapers, week after week. He recalled specific incidents and the incredible results. He recalled young killers' faces as they wept against their mothers' shoulders after sentencing, the sour shame and innocence on the face of the boy who killed a babysitter, another who shot his own father, another who... Oh, God, no, his mind cried in anguish. The vision sickened him. What has gone wrong? Where has something gone wrong, and why? And what is going to happen to Julie? My Julie. What is happening right now? It was then that he realized, half-stopped, slumped, weak and hollow, that if he went on pursuing such thoughts, if he did not now control his mind, he would not make it home in time for the next phone call. 3:11. After he had watched Mr. Elgin turn, almost like a mechanical man, and walk out of the store with the cash in his pocket, Oscar Stoddard turned out the lights and went into the living rooms behind the store. He didn't turn on a light in there. If anyone was watching, he wanted them to think he went back to sleep at once, didn't he? He sat by the phone in the dark for a long moment, fingering his steel-rimmed glasses. $3,000. What if... Then, feeling ashamed, he picked up the phone. A kidnapping. Imagine that. Right here in this town. Right here in this neighborhood. Only 10 or 15 minutes walk away. It was hard to believe. He dialed O. Why had Mr. Elgin asked about Nolan? Funny thing, the way a man under stress will behave. He had seen that in the war himself, you just never knew. The buzz at the other end of the line repeated itself over and over. Oscar glanced into the bedroom where Nolan should be sleeping. That boy. What was he going to do about that kid? The operators must all be asleep. Then a bright feminine voice said, "Operator?" And Oscar Stoddard said, "Get me the police station. Quick." Then, while he waited, he went over the events of the evening in his mind. The phone call from the man asking for Nolan, then hanging up. Then Nolan coming in and getting his knife. Oscar's mind reeled away from that scene because he tasted a bitterness in his mouth whenever he thought of hitting Nolan. He hated himself and the world for hours, sometimes days afterwards, whenever he struck his son. But sometimes a man was helpless. What was a father to do? Then a deep-toned voice spoke in his ear, and Oscar Stoddard pushed aside all other thoughts and concentrated on his report. End of Section 3. Section 4. 313. Julie's legs were straight, her feet braced against the tilt of floorboard, her body rigid and cold. Her hands were clutching the edge of the seat. Any second she expected the car to slide, careening off the road, slithering sidewise and helpless into the river which ran along Nolan's side of the car. They had turned off the highway where the spots of treacherous ice were only occasional, onto the lake road, which, untraveled at this time of year, was crusted with frozen snow where it was not sheeted with ice. This road led alongside the river edge to the lake itself, where there were only the lake club and a few scattered cottages, now all shuttered against the winter. The city seemed far away now, far behind, and ahead only desolation and no help possible. It was hard for Julie to believe, stiff and unbreathing and waiting for the inevitable crash, that only a few nights ago she and Phil had traveled this road going to the Christmas dance at the club. And in a few days they were to go again, this time to the New Year's Eve celebration, after which the club would again be closed until late spring. All that, dances and music and warmth and Phil, seemed a part of another world, one that she had left behind, perhaps forever. A scream now, and Julie could feel it accumulating, tugging in her throat, would go unheard, might only rouse Nolan to further violence. Now, at all costs, she must be careful, must not stir him one way or the other. Ever since she first saw the knife, she had known that the situation was serious. But now she was deeply aware that she could not defy him. She must not kindle, by her defiance, the violence that had cut her lips, bruised her nose, and she must not inflame that other sort of violence that had caused him to rip the wrap from her shoulders. She did not know what to do. She had no idea how to appeal to this boy. Was there any way to prevent what he had in mind? And what exactly was that? Then a fresh thought dropped like a flame into her mind. If he meant to do her harm, he must realize that afterwards he would be caught, punished. Therefore, the only safe way to do what he obviously intended to do would be to kill her. There it was. It was that simple. He intended to kill her.
"Jump out," Nolan said. "Go ahead. Jump."
Startled, Julie turned her head. He was looking at her, not at the road. How had he known that, in that instant, this thought had occurred to her as the only possible way out?
"Scared, Julie? Julie Elgin scared?"
There was a certain pleasure in his tone, as if he had somehow succeeded in something, having reduced her to this stiff, tight, breath-stopping fear.
Go ahead. You can jump.
Julie's chin clamped and a pain crept up her jaw, but she did not scream, did not cry out. Even as she saw him whip the wheels savagely, hurtling the car around to the final curve as river joined lake, the rear end of the car screeching, and then, in awful silence, sliding across the pavement toward the water's edge. Still she did not make a sound. The rear wheels grasped gravel, spat, whirled, and then the whole wild animal of automobiles spurted crazily ahead, up the road beside the lake. Julie heard Nolan laugh and heard in that low, ugly sound an echo of her own defiance at her parents, at the world, at everything. "We are not alike," her heart cried. "We are not." And all of a sudden she was sorry. Of a sudden she saw herself as her mother saw her, heard her own ugly anger as her father must hear it. And for a blazing instant she was lost in wonder. "How did I come to this?" she asked herself. "Why did I act that way?" Nolan was looking at his watch again. Julie realized for the first time that all along the way, from the time he had made that first phone call an hour ago, he had been glancing at his watch off and on, as if he were going to be late for something. What did this mean? Was it simply a habit of his? Or was there more to all this than she could imagine? She saw the Lake Club building looming ahead on the right, built on a promontory of stone above the highway level. Behind the hedges and dark-shadowed tennis courts it looked cold and deserted. Nolan turned into the driveway. Julie gasped. The car crunched over frozen snow. "I'm not a member," Nolan said. "But you are." He slammed on the brakes, the rear tires spinning on the ice. "Me? I used to work here. 3:15. Only 10 minutes to kill." There it was again. Time. What did time have to do with this? Before she could answer this question in her own mind, Nolan had jumped from the car, come sprinting around to her side. Now he stood, door open, looking down at her. The knife was open in his hand. He was sullenly smiling. "We're going in the front door, Julie," his soft voice said. "I never been allowed in that way before." Her teeth chattering, Julie looked up at him. Keeping her voice low, she said, "Nolan, have you thought what's going to happen to you?" The smile widened. "You thought what's going to happen to you?" "It's after 3 o'clock. Dad'll call the police." "You think so?" "Do you know what'll happen to you? Kidnapping, Nolan. That's what this is, kidnapping. If you take me home, we can make up some sort of story and forget the whole thing." She saw the smile slacken, flicker. His eyes wavered. "Too late, Julie. Too late for that, Julie." His voice was almost tender, almost a caress, and almost regretful. "You're going to prison, Nolan," Julie said, trying to control her jaw. "You'll go to prison. Maybe worse in this state." Silence. The wind from the lake cut sharply, coldly at them. Nolan did not seem to breathe. Then his hand shot out, grabbing her arm, half pulling, half dragging, all with one hand while the other held the open knife. Nolan propelled her across the parking area to the front door. "You don't scare me," he said, and the caress was gone. "I ain't scared. Your folks call the police. They know what'll happen to you. They got minds. They can figure it. I'll show them. All of them. You too. The old man too. God damn you. All of you. I'll show you." He stood back and kicked. The glass-paneled front door of the Lake Club smashed, and the sound went crashing and echoing across the water and behind them up into the hills and woods. Breathing hard, Nolan turned to her. "You going in nice?" Julie felt her chin come up without volition. She stepped inside. It was totally dark. "Lead the way," Nolan said. "I need a drink. I'm right behind. I can see that white dress in the dark." Julie mounted the wide stairs. She had done it now, she thought. She had collapsed his last delusion. He had hoped never to stare the possibility of capture in the face, the idea of prison, punishment. It couldn't happen to him. Now, in the hope of appealing on the only rational level she knew, she had forced him to face the possibility. And what had come of it? Only panic. Only this deeper, wilder panic that in the end might prove more dangerous than anything she had so far experienced. In the bar, which was a large paneled room off the dance floor, Julie stopped. Nolan flipped his cigarette lighter. The shelves behind the bar contained no bottles. He turned on her with the flame lighting his face. His eyes were narrow, vindictive.
"You laughing at me?" he demanded without a stutter. "You think it's funny?"
Julie leaned against the bar, said nothing. The bar was between them. Could she outrun him? In the darkness, might she be able to... Nolan stooped down, reached under the bar's surface, his arm thrashing around. If she made a run for it, knowing the building as well as she did... "Ha!" Nolan said and stood up with a half-empty bottle in his hand.
"Ha!"
He tore off the top and tilted it above his head. But Nolan knew the building too, and the grounds. It'd be better if she could get down the stairs again, outside and into the deep woods behind the building. Nolan uttered a huge breath of shock and satisfaction as he lowered the bottle. Julie stared. Now what? The bottle was almost half full. Now what? Should she take her chance? Make a run for it now? Now, before he had finished the whiskey? Because afterwards, after he had swilled it all, what then? A boy like Nolan, a boy already capable of what he had done. What would he be like when drunk? Julie went weak inside, the fear probing the depths, twisting and curling. As Nolan lifted the bottle again, his eyes mocking her, she turned abruptly away and looked out the windows, across the road, across the dark surface of lake. How could she know? If she ran now and he reached her... He had hit her before, but this time she might not be so lucky. Still, she could feel the impulse to run rippling in the muscles of her legs. And it was then that she saw the faint but unmistakable outline of a car parked on the road at the stone pillars of the club entrance. It was not Nolan's car. That was in the parking area. No lights shone. Nothing moved. Julie's heart swelled. Someone had seen them come in. Someone. She could not breathe. Then, before she could move, she heard the car's motor. It must have been running, and now it roared. Headlights flashed on, and the car pulled away. Julie felt Nolan's hand on her shoulder, spinning her about. She watched him, standing, panting in the window. Over his shoulder, she saw the retreating headlights moving down the road. Nolan turned, and the now familiar sensation of total desertion, abandonment, swept through Julie.
"Knackers,"
Nolan said, the caress returning to his tone.
"Just knackers, like you and Phil, huh?"
Julie was hollow and drained.
"Good places for parking around here."
Was she going to cry? She felt the tears stinging behind her eyes and was amazed. She never cried. Hadn't Phil said so? Hadn't Dad? She was like her mother. She never cried. One hand reaching for a glass on the shelves, Nolan moved around the end of the bar.
"Have a drink, Julie."
Julie forced back the tears. She shook her head. Nolan stepped closer. So close now that she caught a whiff of whiskey stench on his breath.
"You too good to drink with me?"
Again, Julie shook her head, saying nothing, as Nolan poured whiskey into the tumbler. It was strange to feel that you were going to crumble, to go to pieces, in tears, helpless and without strength. It was new to Julie. She saw Nolan set the bottle on the bar, heard the echoing click of that sound, stared at the glass he extended toward her. She was not aware that she was biting her bruised lip until she tasted blood. Her eyes were fixed on the glitter of glass with the dark liquid in it. The car was gone. All help was gone. No one cared. She was alone in this. There was nothing, absolutely nothing that she could do.
"Drink it,"
Nolan said. Dumbly, Julie took it. Her eyes lifted, met Nolan's. A cigarette dangled, unlighted, from the corner of his lips. He snapped his lighter, illuminating his face. He was not quite grinning, and already his eyes were glowing with the liquor. The liquor, or his intent, whatever it was.
"Warm you up," Nolan said. "You're a cold cat, Julie. Need warming up. You gonna do what I say, or what?"
Julie was tempted to hurl the liquid into his mocking eyes, smash the glass across his grinning face. She thrust the temptation aside, aware that any violence on her part could only trigger more violence on his. and it could be violence of any sort at all. His voice was quiet, but she felt the throb of a new excitement in it.
You drink with me, Julie? Maybe you get to like me better, huh?
Then, when she still did not move or lift a glass, he barked,
Do what I say, damn it!
He stepped again. He was almost touching her, looking down into her face. His eyes were full of fury. Julie wanted to believe it was fury. She could feel the rounded edge of bar top against her back. Again his voice was low, soft.
You're gonna do what I say, Julie. Just what I say.
The words seemed to stir a slow, powerful fever in him.
That and nothing else. No matter what I tell you to do, you're gonna do it, Julie.
His hand closed around hers over the glass. He lifted it to her lips, slowly against the strain of her arm. She was surprised at the strength of his grip, his fingers digging into her hands like claws. Julie made up her mind. She could not oppose him on this. She drank. The whiskey burned in her mouth and dropped like fire down her throat. It ignited her chest and she coughed. Her stomach turned over. Nolan's talon-like hold on her hand did not relax. Julie twisted her head, unable to breathe. Nolan's other hand shot out, grasped her behind the neck, held her head in a vice-like grip. She was helpless now. Still, she struggled. The glass was clicking against her front teeth, the liquor spilling from it, some gushing hotly into her mouth, some splashing onto her bare throat and the front of her gown, wet and cold. In that instant, as he held her, one leg moving in close to pin her body, Julie caught a glimpse of his face. Determined, inflamed, cruel, triumphant. Desolation swept her. She went slack, all fight seeping away. What could she hope for? What was the use? Nolan poured the rest of the whiskey into her mouth, then stood back, his eyes roving over her. Those people in that car. Why had they stopped out there? Where were they going? Why hadn't they come in? Nolan reached for the bottle and poured himself a drink, not taking his eyes from her. Through blurred and burning vision, she saw his tongue flick out, wetting his lips. Then she heard rather than saw him down the whiskey. Why didn't somebody, anybody, care enough to do something? 3:18. The car was turning down the river road toward town. The man who was driving rubbed the steam from the windows with his palm. He was too intent on the slippery road ahead to glance at the young woman beside him.
And what will the police ask you? She was saying. They'll want to know your name, won't they?
Somebody was breaking in, the man said. You heard the crash. You saw the light inside. All I'm going to do is get to a phone and report to the state police that someone has broken into the lake club.
And then they'll ask you who you were with, won't they? And maybe what you were doing out there at this time of morning.
The police won't give a damn about any of that. I can certainly give them my name.
And mine? You'll give them mine too, I suppose?
Of course not.
Only you will, that's all. And then what will Leo do? Do you want me to spell it out, darling? He'll take the children away from me. That's what dear old sweet Leo will do. I already told you this. I'm not going to lose custody because of this. Because of you.
I see.
I'm glad. It's only 4 more months till the decree's final, after all. It's bad enough as it is, ducking around like criminals, but...
I told you I understand, the man said, and slowed the car. I'll take you home. I won't call the police. And then I'm going away.
What?
Away. For 4 months, until the decree is final. We both feel like criminals, and I don't like what it's doing to us. Now come over here and give me a kiss. Give me a kiss that will last for 4 months, because I mean it. If things like this keep happening, something's going to happen to us. And that's not what I want. The young woman moved closer and leaned her head against his shoulder.
I'm glad, she whispered. I can't help it. I'm glad, darling. 4 months isn't forever.
And after all, the man said, slowing the car to a crawl. After all, what's one burglary, more or less? I'm sure the lake club's insured.
I can't help it, the woman said. I'm glad someone did break in there tonight. Aren't you?
3:20. By this time, 8 minutes after the telephone report from an Oscar Stoddard, who owned a drugstore on the north side of town, a vast police apparatus had begun to grind. The police chief, who had been sound asleep after a long evening of poker and beer, had been notified in his home. He had, as was expected, given the desk sergeant a dressing down for not ascertaining more facts, asking the Stoddard more questions. He had then given some general instructions, at the same time voicing his first, off-the-cuff opinion that it wasn't much of a kidnapping. Various other officers had been called, requested to come at once to the station. Officers on duty in various parts of town had been carefully alerted by code on radio, and as usual in cases of this sort, the state police barracks on the south edge of town and the local FBI office, in a city 37 miles distant, had been informed. Several city police patrol cars had been dispatched to the area of the Stoddard Pharmacy and the Elgin home, and the one assigned normal routine duty in that north side area had received more detailed and specific instructions. It was now the duty of this car, the one with the number 34 printed under the police crest on the side door, to patrol casually, on the lookout for anything unusual in the area, and for anyone acting in any smallest way suspiciously. To avoid passing the Elgin home itself, since the car would not normally do so on its round of duty, and to await further orders by radio. It was for this reason that Patrol Car 34 slowed to a stop after a yellow convertible had passed it in front of a shopping area 3 blocks from the Elgin home. The yellow car was traveling at a normal rate of speed in the opposite direction. There was nothing at all suspicious about the yellow convertible, really, but it was an odd time of night for such a car to be on the streets. So the patrol car swung into the parking area of the shopping center and turned around, following the yellow convertible without giving chase. 3:21. When Phil Reynolds realized that the car he had passed was a police prowl car, his hands for some reason gripped the wheel. Why? It had taken him not quite half an hour to drive in from the farm. He had driven carefully, with his headlights probing for the slick patches on the pavement, but not slowly, because there was a strange pulsing urgency in his blood, which he could not explain to himself, any more than he could explain to the police officers in that car following what he was doing now. What was he doing? He couldn't say that his girl had given him the brush and had then gone out with someone else, and that this other fellow hadn't come home yet, so he was worried. It didn't make much sense. His own father had said that as he left the house. In fact, his father had told him to stop behaving like an adolescent and go back to bed and let everyone get some sleep. But Phil had not done so. He had done things his own way this time. The strange part of that was that, in his mother's eyes, and more amazingly in his father's, he had caught, or imagined he had caught, a certain gleam of pride when he went out and climbed into his yellow car and drove off. Now, conscious of the headlights reflecting in his rearview mirror, he made another turn and approached the Elgin home. The headlights did not follow, and he breathed deeply in relief. Then he saw the light spilling out the window of the Elgin home. The curtains were drawn back. Julie's mother sat behind the picture window, staring into the street. A shadow paced behind her. Julie's father. Phil looked at the clock on the dashboard. 3:22. And Julie was not home yet. Should he go in? And say what? If Julie wanted to go out and stay this late with someone like Nolan Stoddard, what could he say? That he had allowed her to do so? Perhaps, damn it, she was enjoying herself. She was probably enjoying keeping her parents on tenterhooks like this. She'd get a certain satisfaction out of that. And he understood that, too, to some extent. And that understanding weighed on him, a responsibility. It weighed on him to such a degree that now, as he thought of her with Nolan for 2 hours, drinking, doing God knows what, even his jealousy was tinged with tenderness and guilt. He should not have let her go. He should have stopped her. He could have done that with love, not with force or self-assertion, but a simple confession of his own need for her. And he had failed, out of pride and momentary anger, to do so. He was past the house. He would wait a bit. Julie knew how to handle herself. He'd hang around a little until she came home. After all, what could happen to Julie? He turned the corner and saw the police car moving by. It swung into position behind him. Followed. 3:24. The patrolman first class driving Patrol Car 34 did not feel that he should make the decision under the circumstances, so in the past 2 minutes he had spoken to his chief, reporting the activity of the yellow convertible, and the chief had simply instructed him to tail the car, making sure that its occupant had no opportunity to get word to anyone else. If the car stopped, arrest the occupant on any routine traffic charge and then report back. 3:25. The police car was still behind him, reducing speed as Phil slowed down, moving faster as Phil stepped on the gas. What was happening? Phil felt the first electric shock of fear. What did this mean? He recalled Julie's parents behind the picture window. Julie. He felt an ache begin somewhere deep inside. His hunch had been right. Julie. Something had happened to Julie. No. If that were true, why wouldn't the police car be at the Elgin home, parked in the driveway? Julie, where are you? End of Section 4. Section 5. 3:26. Julie was still fighting back tears, and this fact alone continued to astonish her. She was seated on a bar stool. The silence of the clubhouse was oppressive. The place was heated, but a chill had crept into Julie's bones, and, despite the moving heat of the liquor which she could still feel blazing in her stomach, the cold had settled heavily into her heart. She knew now that she was not going to be sick, but the knowledge brought no relief. Her mind was wandering in various directions. She supposed the whiskey had something to do with this, although she was not sure, but it remained acutely conscious of Nolan's eyes riveted on her. Those eyes, intent and contemptuous, glowed hawk-like in the dimness. Julie kept trying to avoid them with her own, but the steady stare worked on her raw nerves, and she had to clench her fists to keep from screaming or running or leaping through the high windows. On the other side of the bar, Nolan would pour another drink, would light another cigarette from the glowing stub of the last one, would stir his iceless drink with the open knife that gleamed in the dim reflection of the sky on the lake surface. But all the while he did not remove his steady, fierce, contemplative stare from Julie. She felt impaled on that stare, impaled and stripped and helpless. To keep from returning his look, to keep her own eyes from meeting his, because how could you know the idle act or glance that might decide him on action? Julie let her gaze roam around the room, over the empty shelves behind the bar, into the mirror where she saw Nolan's back and her own bright face and shoulders reflected, and over the mirror where, emblazoned on a decorative panel, were the familiar words, "If you're not having a good time, go home." Recalling the words, she did not have to read them, Julie felt a giddiness rise in her. If you're not having a good time, go home. It was the Lake Club motto and the subject of 1,000 weary jokes. She had to control the hysterical laughter that welled up in her throat. She had never felt so alone, so deserted. Why weren't they doing something? Here she sat in this empty clubhouse which she had always known bright with the lights and loud with music and gaiety, and no one knew. No one knew, and no one cared. It was that which struck Julie with a pain which made her double over the bar, lowering her head, her hair tumbling, her forehead pressing against the cold, smooth wood. They must know. Hadn't Nolan phoned them? What had he said? When she asked him that, he had only laughed. Well, what did it matter, really? She tasted a bitterness in her mouth that was not blood. It was the acrid taste of loneliness, a loneliness that had been with her all her life, really. Then, in the back of her mind, but moving into inexorable focus, were the pushed-down, smothered memories that she most despised. The hospital waiting room, the chill early morning hour, the stiff-dressed white nurses, the awful quiet, and down the mysterious corridor, the door to a room where Rod lay, crumpled, not her 8-year-old older brother now, but a broken bird, face contorted with pain, unrecognizable. And in the waiting room, Dad holding her hand tight, too tight, his face revealing nothing, shutting her out, trying to protect her from the knowledge that Rod might die. And then suddenly Mother appearing, handkerchief to her face, her head shaking from side to side, and the two of them walking to the high dark windows, a few words floating back. "He's so brave." "He just lies there.
His legs.
They don't know. And then the words that now struck Julie again with the increased force of multiplied memories. Her mother's voice, the words almost lost in sobs.
Oh, why did it have to be him?
Oh, why did it have to be him? And worse. Oh, much worse. Impossible. Untrue. No, no. Her own snake-like wisp of wish that he would die. It wasn't true. It hadn't happened that way. She had never had such a thought. Never. She heard herself draw a long, shuddering breath. She couldn't blame Rod. It was not fair. Had never been fair to blame Rod. Then who? Her father? What had he done? Then or later, what had he done? That was it, really. It came to her now, clearly. That was exactly it. He had done nothing. By his smile, his gentle, knowing glance. At times she was certain he understood, or would like to understand. But he had done nothing. He had never taken a stand. As for Mother, well... A hand closed over her heart. She had seen her mother cry 3 times. Count them. 3 times. A sadness mingled with the bitterness, and the flames of anger licked sharply at her mind. 3 times. Once when Rod had almost died, that morning in the hospital. Once when Rod left for the army. And once, only 6 months ago, when Rod had married. 3 times only, in a lifetime. And always for Rod. Always for him. Never once for Julie. Never once that she could remember. Never once for Julie. If you're not having a good time, go home. Now the hysterical laughter was gone. The taste was like dust in her mouth. And Nolan moved. Julie's head lifted quickly, every muscle of her body tensing again, going rigid. He was standing behind the bar, looking down on her. Mockery flickered in his eyes.
"Time for me to make a certain call," he said, then without moving. "Thought you was crying. But then, you don't cry, do you? Not the type."
Julie said nothing. It was true. Hadn't her father said it himself? That Julie was so much like her mother that she would not cry as other women did? Too proud? Too strong? Or too stubborn? Nolan uttered a low, short laugh and turned to the telephone. Julie watched him dial, bending over the instrument. And in that brief moment it came to her that he was now committing a final act. That now, this instant, while the dial clicked and whirred, he was passing the point of no return, and he was carrying her with him. After this, there would be no going back. After this. And she had been wasting time. She had been feeling sorry for herself when she should have been trying to reach him, to make him understand. Not to terrify him into action, but carefully to make him understand that it was not too late. She spoke his name. Frowning, surprised, he turned. Had he completed the dialing? She said,
"Listen, Nolan, listen. Take me home. I'll forget it, all of it, I promise. I won't tell anybody. I'll even lie."
In her urgency, she was leaning across the bar, her feet braced on the footrail.
"Listen, Nolan, please. If you don't go any further, you'll be free. You won't have to worry about it. Nolan, are you listening? I'll even pretend it was a joke and that I was in on it. To my parents, I mean. And you won't have to be afraid."
Nolan replaced the phone. Julie took a breath. His face was blank as he stepped toward her. His voice was low as he spoke.
"I'm not scared, Julie. Whatever gave you the idea I'm scared?"
His eyes dropped to her throat and down to where the gown fell away from her breasts. Automatically, with one hand fluttering to her throat, Julie sat back, straightening. Nolan laughed then. This time it was a loud, raucous sound that struck the walls and re-echoed through the building. His eyes now were like those of a hawk, piercing, fixed, suggesting wildness, but steady, stabbing at her.
"You don't know me, Julie. Hell, nobody knows me. Nobody knows what I got inside, what I can do. You want to know, Julie? 'Cause I'll tell you, kid. Free."
He was not stuttering.
"It's like this. It's me against all of them. Everybody. Only I ain't had a chance to show 'em. Not yet. Now I'm showing 'em. And you too, huh, Julie?"
He towered above her, shouting now, the muscles of his neck rippling and bunching, his nostrils dilating, his eyes fierce.
"I can do anything I want. Anything I want. I'm going to show them and you and everybody. And I'm going to end up in Canada or somewhere. Maybe even Europe. And they can't touch me, draft or nobody, once I pull this off. You got that straight, Cat? You got that straight now? I ain't going to get blown up in no damn war either. They ain't going to get me. I hear a lot of guys talking that way. They don't know what's ahead either. But I'm different. I'm doing something about it. That's me. That's me."
Then he stopped. He was breathing hard, standing above her, his face close, his eyes red and half-closed now and dark. And Julie gazed into the depths of a world that she had never known. She saw the pain and turmoil and the glitter of madness, and she shrank down and away, a cold ripple of terror passing down her body.
"Answer me,"
Nolan persisted, but softly.
"Answer me, Julie. You got that straight?"
Julie only nodded, unable to pull her eyes from his, even as she saw his drop once again, roaming over her shoulders. The desire was naked on his face now. Then she heard the click sound, and without looking, knew that the knife was in his hand. She caught the glimmer of its reflection and still did not, could not, move. Even as she saw him, silent now except for the unsteady, excited breathing, slide down the bar and around the end of it and approach, she could not move. This is it, her mind told her. This is it. And still her body was paralyzed. All the fears of the night had accumulated like dead weight through her. She saw him reach out one arm. She felt it go around her. She remained motionless. Don't struggle, her mind warned her. Don't fight now, with the knife against her back. He drew her to him slowly. She could smell his heavy breath. If she moved now, if she even tensed as if to draw away, what might happen? She forced herself to remain within the circle of his arm, as his face lowered to hers. With a severe steadying of will, she refused to twist her head. She felt his lips on hers, thick, repulsive, probing. She did not move, nor, breathless, did she return the kiss. Nolan straightened. He was frowning now, as if trying to make up his own mind, as if occupied by some inner struggle of his own. He stepped back, but only so that his eyes could once again scan her figure. She felt the gown being ripped away in his mind. She saw the knife in his hand, glittering. "Oh, God," her mind whispered. "Oh, God, what now?" And in anguish, "What can I do? What is there to do?" On the verge of hysteria now, in the empty, waiting silence, she blurted, "You don't always stutter, do you?" Nolan blinked. It was as if she had struck him a blow. His mouth opened, closed, and she saw the animal desire fade from his face and stance. He turned away as if shaking something from his alcohol-blurred mind. Then, in an abrupt, violent motion, he swept the glass from the bar and sent it crashing to the floor, the glass shattering. In the same motion, he whirled to face her, trembling all over.
"I always stuttered,"
Nolan said, and Julie knew she had made a mistake. The familiar animal passion had been replaced with this much more unpredictable and awful fury. What had she done now?
"Yeah, I stutter. That's something to laugh at, that is. That's what they do, ain't it? Laugh. You too, huh? And Rod?"
The mention of her brother's name startled her. But she had no time for surprise, because Nolan went on, his voice hard and full of venom now.
"Where is Rod? In the army, sure. That's where Rod'd be. Big shot. Always gonna be the big shot. Rod in his white sweater."
Nolan stepped closer.
"You remember that white sweater he had? Tennis sweater? Only he wore it all the time. After the football games, after he'd won. All the time. You remember, Julie?"
And Julie, remembering, utterly bewildered, nodded.
"I wanted me one of those white sweaters so hard.
He broke off.
"Your brother's a son of a bitch and a bastard."
In the silence that followed, Julie could hear, even above Nolan's deep, loud breathing, the lake lapping at the wharf. She saw his shoulders heaving, the hurt look in his face now. Suddenly he looked forlorn and young. She couldn't see the sideburns now, in this light, nor the long upturned hair along his neck. He looked very young and vulnerable and unhappy, and for a split second at least, she forgot the knife in his hand.
"What did Rod ever do to you, Nolan?" she asked.
"Bastard in his white sweater,"
Nolan said, and he was speaking from a time gone by, from another world. It didn't make sense. It was not reasonable. Rod had done nothing. He had only been himself. The lucky one, the smiled on, the loved. He was loved and knew it, and with that knowledge he could face anything. Nolan was like Julie. Nolan. In a second, if she didn't watch herself, she'd be feeling sorry for Nolan. She was forgetting what she had set out to do.
"Take me home, Nolan," she said softly. "Take me home now. Everything's going to be all right."
Now, Nolan was smiling again, but there was an ugly emptiness in it.
"It sure is, Julie,"
Nolan said.
"I almost forgot you was Rod's sister. I almost forgot that damn white sweater."
Triumph was in him now, and joy, anticipation. Julie saw his mood swing crazily again. She saw the determination leap to his face, and the renewed excitement. She wanted to look away now, as his eyes stabbed into hers, but she knew this might possibly be the single act that would stir him to action. Still, she couldn't stand frozen here if he stepped toward her again. The speculative expression she had seen in the eyes of many men was on Nolan's face now, and she realized that, as of this moment, he had forgotten the phone call, his hope for escape, everything but her presence, her closeness. Julie took a deep breath.
"If you don't call my father when you said you would," she breathed, "he'll call the police for sure."
This did not seem to reach his mind. It was as if he had not heard. His eyes gloated.
"You scared now, Julie? You scared at last?"
"I'll call them,"
she said, and moved. Even as she swung around the bar to the phone, she realized that any action was better than standing, waiting, not knowing. If violence came now, and she knew it would because she heard him move behind her as she dialed swiftly, at least it would soon be over. At least it was released from this wire-taut tension that she could no longer bear without breaking. She felt his hand on her shoulder, felt herself being spun about, staggering. When she stopped, she faced him. He now held the phone in his hand and was glaring at her, caught in that moment in indecision, while at the other end of the line Julie heard the buzzing sound of a phone ringing, and then a voice saying, "Hello? Hello? Hello?" She recognized the voice as that of her father. Nolan, in the moment's silence that followed, looked down at the telephone as though he had some strange foreign object in his hand. Then slowly, but still glaring at Julie, he lifted it to his mouth.
"Shut up, Elgin,"
he hissed, and all at once he was back in command.
"Shut up, Elgin, and listen."
And as he spoke, his eyes met Julie's. She saw the glint of revenge in them, and realized that somehow she had gotten the better of him, at least for a second or two, and that he would not forget it, or forgive. "I'll get back to you," his eyes promised while he listened. Julie could hear the familiar heavy voice distorted by mechanical distance. She could not make out what her father was saying, but Nolan's reply somehow surprised her.
She's okay.
And so Julie knew that her father had first asked about her. She felt her heart expand, thinking of his face at the phone, and the familiar warm living room at home.
"Now, you got the dough?"
A pause, then,
"Okay, here's what you do now, Elgin."
But Nolan frowned then, tensing, and another voice came crying through the telephone. Nolan's face grew sullen, his eyes glowering, and then he grinned and held the phone away from his ears so that Julie could hear the shrill, furious voice.
"Whoever you are, if anything happens to Julie, you'll answer to me. If any harm comes to my Julie, you'll be sorry. One way or the other, now or later, whether police catch you or not. Do you hear me? Are you listening? You'll answer to me."
There was more, but Julie was not hearing now. She was too stunned, too filled with the hot flush of certainty, and at the same time too incredulous and weak. It was her mother's voice. It was the familiar anger, not now directed at her, and not now the small, trivial thing it had always been, if only Julie had been able to see it before, but a violent and awful threat, a bawling, murderous promise for revenge, something savage and primeval and horrendous, yet filling Julie with a strength and near joy that closed her eyes to Nolan's scowl, the exposed knife, the lonely night outside. Hearing that avalanche of words, she knew, for that brief time at least, a warmth. And again she felt the hot tears threatening to erupt behind her lids. Finally, Nolan shouted into the phone.
"Shut up! I said shut up! She's okay. She's right here. You want to talk to her, lady?"
Then he shoved the phone toward Julie, and with his other hand brought the knife up. Julie's gaze met his. For a moment she was not afraid.
"Mother?"
she said into the phone. Then there was a breath, but only a breath, as of a gasp, and silence.
"Mother,"
Julie said again.
"Listen, Mother. I'm all right. I'm fine, really. You know what I always say, Mother? If you're not having a good time, go home."
She waited, and it was then that she heard the sound. At first she could not believe it. It was a sound more incredible and astonishing and heart-stopping than the wild rage had been. It was the faint but unmistakable sound of a sob. "Julie," her father's voice said. "Is that you, Julie? Oh, thank God. Your mother can't talk. She's crying. Are you all right?" Julie's throat closed. Her father's words echoed crazily through her mind.
"Tell him,"
Nolan said.
"I'm fine,"
Julie whispered into the phone through tight, dry lips.
"I'm having a good time, you know. If you're not having a good time, go home."
Nolan snatched the phone and Julie moved slowly away, lost in confusion, only faintly hearing his instructions to her father as she tried vainly, with some strange pain gnawing at the relief and joy that she dared not feel, to sort out the impressions and meanings of the last few minutes. 3:32. Helen was only dimly aware that Charles had replaced the phone and was now going up the stairs to the bedroom. She was still stupefied at the sound of Julie's voice, realizing now that there had been times, several times in the last hour and a half, when she had expected never to hear that voice again. But what had Julie said? It had made no sense. She sounded drunk or drugged or... The sound of a drawer banging shut upstairs brought Helen to her feet. She moved on unsteady legs up the steps, hearing again her own rage-filled voice as she spoke on the phone. She went over in her mind what Charles had told her since his return from cashing the check, that he suspected the kidnapper might be a young man or boy, that he knew from his 2 previous conversations with the boy that he was sick and therefore dangerous, and that he suspected that he might have been wrong under those circumstances in sending for the police, who for some reason beyond Helen's ken had not arrived. If what Charles believed was actually true, then what might her anger and threats stir up in such a mind? What had she done now because she could not control herself? She went into the bedroom. Charles was loading the old gun that some uncle or other had given him years ago. Helen stared at the ugly, black, lethal-looking weapon as it became real as any other part of the nightmare that had swallowed them all. "Listen to me," Charles was saying. "Listen, I'm going for a walk to Route 41, and go north till someone stops me or meets me. Don't worry, I won't give up the money till I have Julie."
"Walk?"
she asked.
"Charles? Walk?"
She was looking at the drawn paleness of his skin around the red-rimmed, sunken, burning eyes.
"Darling, why?"
Charles was tugging on his coat. "They want to watch me. That is, he wants to watch me. I think he's working alone. I can't support that, but it's what I think. I think I know who it is, too. I think it's Oscar Stoddard's son."
That child?"
And Helen heard herself laugh once, a flicker of relief.
"But, Charles, if that's true, why—"
But at that moment something in his eye, or in the way he turned his head away and pulled the collar of his coat up, something hidden and retreating in his manner, made her step closer.
would be worse, wouldn't it, Charles? That's what you're thinking, isn't it? A sick boy, frightened, twisted.
I didn't say that. It was almost a shout. I don't know. I'm guessing. Anyway, he wants to watch me. He took her arms. Now listen, Helen. I did what you asked. I've sent for the police. We may have been right in that, I don't know. But I feel it was not right. I still feel that. So I'm not going to ask you now, I'm telling you. No matter what you think, no matter how you feel yourself or what you believe, if the police come here, you are not to tell them where I've gone. Do you understand that? You are to tell them you don't know. Because if they should follow me, and he should see them, he'd take it out on Julie. Don't ask me how I know that either, but I do. Are you listening, Helen? You are going to do exactly what I say. She gazed a long moment into his eyes, then collapsed against his chest. She felt his hand fumble for her face, tilt it. She felt his lips on hers. The world spun. It had been years since he had kissed her with such tenderness and strength.
I understand, she whispered. Whatever you say, dear.
She caught then, or imagined she caught, a flicker of surprise in his tired, tense eyes. Then, after he was gone, and the door had been closed and locked, she leaned against it, unwilling or unable to return to the fiendishly lighted stage set of the living room. And with her forehead pressed against the smooth surface of the front door, she felt a new warmth begin to penetrate her body. Charles was handling the matter, free of her advice, or was it a sort of tyranny? Charles had taken over, and she would do what he wished. She could depend on Charles. It was the first time in her life that she had known this almost total relaxation of will, and for that fleeting second or two Helen knew that if everything did not turn out all right, no matter what happened now, at least Charles would have done all that could be done. She trusted him completely. 3:35. If Patrol Car 34 had not been stopped behind the Stoddard Pharmacy, it might have been in the vicinity of Charles's walk to Route 41, and Charles might have been spotted by the police before he had even reached that highway. But the driver of the patrol car had followed the yellow convertible as instructed until such time as the convertible had drawn to an abrupt stop. A tall young man had leaped out and walked back to the police car, even as the patrolman was drawing his gun. The young man, who did not fit into any criminal category familiar to the patrolman, demanded to know why he was being followed and whether it had anything to do with a girl named Julie Elgin, because if it did, he wanted the police to know she was his girl, and he wanted the straight facts. This had placed the patrolman in something of a quandary, so he had radioed the chief, who was at that moment en route to the Stoddard Pharmacy, and Police Car 34 had been ordered to proceed carefully to that meeting place and to park behind the drugstore out of view of the street. As soon as Phil was led into the dimly lighted drugstore, as soon as he saw the haggard, worried face of Oscar Stoddard, he had somehow guessed the whole thing. It did not take him long, then, after the arrival of the chief and other investigating officers, to relate what he knew of the evening. Mr. Stoddard had said that it was about time they began to act. He himself hadn't known that his son was with the Elgin girl, but if she had been kidnapped, what then had happened to his son? Had they killed Nolan? Had they killed his only son? Oh, God, the unthinkable things that went on today. 3:36. By now, nothing was unthinkable to Julie. It was still impossible to know whether it would be a show of defiance or submissiveness that might trip the trigger of Nolan's furious, drunken mind. Quiet, unresisting, she allowed him to bind her wrists behind her back as she lay stretched out on the smooth, waxy-smelling floor. Her helplessness was now complete, she realized grimly, as Nolan, kneeling beside her, pulled the knots tighter, then tighter still. The silk cord, which he had yanked from the curtain rods at the windows, cut knife-like into her flesh. She was aware of his hands, rough and impersonal, on her body, as he rolled her over on the floor. He was working fast now, not looking at her, every move mechanical and cold and precise. He tossed another length of cord around her ankles, drew it taut, then taut her, until her ankle bones bruised each other, and she had to bite her sore lip to keep from crying out in pain. She could see him now, in the half-light, and she was aware of the need for violence in him, the cruelty and the necessity for release of some sort in every move he made. Instinctively she knew, too, that she must not now, at whatever cost, confess or acknowledge her sense of helplessness, her terror, as it was, this sort of abject admission that might ignite the powder keg of his emotions. In the interval since the phone call, Nolan had remained silent, detached, thoughtful. His eyes, whenever they flickered toward her, had immediately looked away. At first, Julie, also silent and recalling the kiss before the phone call, had felt a certain relief, telling herself that now he was thinking only of the money and what he would do once he had it. But slowly then, with a tightening all through her body, she had realized that, just possibly, he was considering in that confused and turbulent mind what might happen if he were to give in to the electric and explosive dictates of his body. With the thought, her fear had deepened. Julie knew, and had known almost from the beginning really, that no matter how much he might want and need that money, a more powerful, more elemental and savage impulse, or hunger, had driven him into this. Utterly helpless now, conscious of her bare shoulders and exposed knees, and the harsh cruelty of the knots he had tied, Julie was watching Nolan stand up. Again, without letting his gaze linger, he stooped, picked up the knife, snapped it shut. The click sounded in the stillness like a gun exploding. Nolan shoved the knife into his jacket pocket, zipped up the front of the leather jacket, hunched his shoulders, and turned away. Julie held her breath. Nolan took 3 sharp-heeled steps, then stopped. Julie's breath became a pain in her chest. She watched him turn. She could feel rather than see his eyes, flicking and raking over her now. Still, she did not move a single muscle or blink an eye. Nolan was in shadow, shoulders at an angle, legs planted apart. He had not spoken for so long now that his voice sounded clouded and strange.
"We've been wasting time, Julie. You and me."
The sharp-edged aggressiveness was gone, but a new, lower quality of decision was in his tone.
"I got to meet your old man now, Julie. Only I'll be back. 'Cause we got a date, Julie."
And each time he used her name, she caught the note of feverish sensuality and banked down violence.
"You hear me, Julie?"
And he took a single step toward her.
"You and me, we got a date. Right here. I'm the only one knows where you are, Julie. Only me."
Then, so suddenly that she was taken completely by surprise, Nolan was kneeling beside her. Without touching her with his hands, he lowered his head over hers and planted a harsh and ugly kiss, at once contemptuous and demanding, on her unmoving, carefully unresisting and unresponsive lips. He then stood up almost as fast as he had swooped down.
"You yell if you want to, Julie,"
he said, and now he spoke loudly.
"Yell all you want."
Then, with a mocking and triumphant and excited laugh, he whirled about and was swallowed up in the darkness of the ballroom. His swaggering laughter floated back to her, echoing hollowly in the thunder of his footsteps in the empty building. After that, she lay and heard the motor of his car spurting to life outside, thrumming crazily as he gunned the motor, then receding. She was alone. She moved her arms tentatively. The cord cut flesh. She lifted her knees, but this only drew her gown farther up her thighs and sent a shock of pain through her ankles. It was the chillest time of night, those hours before morning, and the frigid outside air had penetrated. Her skin was taut with cold from head to toe. She could not lie there. Somehow she must find a way to free herself.
"You and me, we got a date. Right here. I'm the only one knows where you are, Julie."
She knew the meaning of those words. Desperation stirred in her. Panic. But by that time, her mind reassured, they will be here. By the time Nolan can get back, they'll have it all figured out. If you're not having a good time, go home. That phrase, so much a part of the lake club itself that one of them was certain to get its meaning, that phrase would save her. She worked her hand tentatively, probing with her fingers to see whether they might reach the knot. Her father almost never came to the club himself. He rarely drank, and even more rarely standing at the club bar. He might not even know the motto, and under the pressure of the moment it might never occur to him. Her mind was charging wildly now. They had joined the club in the first place because of Rod, so that Rod would have somewhere to take his dates. One finger touched the twist of knot. She tugged. The fingernails split painfully. In her mind she was struggling with the returning engulfing assault of a familiar confusion and bitterness. Rod again. Somehow Rod worked his way into everything. And as she struggled now, as she twisted to reach the knot with her own fingers, failing, she fought down the idea of giving up. It would serve them all right if... No, the bitterness was false. She lay back, breathing hard. She remembered her mother's sob on the phone. The pain crept slowly, coldly up one hand into her arm. She felt a trickle of blood from the broken nail. Your mother can't talk. She's crying. Julie went weak. Her mother was crying. And for her. For me, her mind insisted. But a nibbling incredulity remained.
If anything happened to Julie, you'll answer to me. One way or the other, now or later, whether the police catch you or not. Do you hear me? Are you listening? You'll answer to me.
Julie heard again the volcanic power of her mother's primeval scream over the telephone, and the incredulity faded. It was replaced with a sudden question. Is that why Nolan didn't touch me? And it was then, with the stillness like a pressure around her, bearing in, that Julie realized what her mother herself must have suffered, what both her father and mother must be going through this instant, now. And in a very real sense, she, Julie herself, was to blame. She sat up with difficulty, determined to struggle. There had to be a way. If she was to blame tonight, if she had been wrong, was it possible that somehow she had been wrong all along? She demanded of herself, is that possible? Had she herself, not they, failed to understand? She turned and began searching the darkness with her eyes. There had to be a way. She couldn't put them through more than they had already suffered. She couldn't let them go on in uncertainty and fear and pain. But she could not see clearly. A tear blurred her vision. Then more tears. She drew up her knees and lowered her head. In a moment then she was sobbing, but not in hopelessness, not in self-pity. She was not weeping for herself at all. And it was this realization, even more than the incredible and unfamiliar tears, that amazed her as she gave herself over to the first racking anguish of self-knowledge. End of Section 5.
Section 6. 3:49. Charles was walking. His legs had begun to ache, and his back, tensed from the time of the first phone call, over an hour and a half ago now, was ramrod stiff and full of pain. Charles's nerves always gathered in a tormenting knot at the base of his skull, then moved, gnawing at first, down his spine, finally resulting in an unthrobbing, steady ache. His hands were jammed into his overcoat pockets. He was on the outskirts of the town, on the edge of the highway, walking north toward the lake. No cars passed, and so far no cars had followed. Had Oscar Stoddard suspected the truth about his son and refused to call the police? The truth. How do you know what's the truth? How could you be sure? Whoever it was, that did not matter. What mattered now was what that kind of human being, boy or man, would do if trapped. The memory of that voice on the phone, the wildness in it, opened up again the depths of horror that Charles dared not let himself imagine. A terrified, sick, hysterical boy. He might be capable, as the newspapers daily attested, of worse cruelty, more unimaginable crimes, than a hardened criminal whose only goal was money. God, Charles breathed to the night air, the empty sky. God, let her be safe. A car approached from behind, flooding the highway with light. Charles's mind emptied. He felt the relief of action as he concentrated on the sound of approaching motor. It slowed. This was it. His right hand was sweaty around the butt of pistol in his overcoat pocket.
the old gun Uncle Jeff had given him years before. And with the metal hot in his palm and fingers, Charles was overwhelmed by the sour, choking rage that had been building in him for over an hour now. And with astonishment he recognized that rage for what it was now. The impulse, beating in every muscle and throbbing in every nerve of his aching body, to kill. He saw his shadow on the pavement before him. Distorted, large, unreal. He could kill. He would kill. Boy or man or men, whatever, whoever. He would kill. It was as simple as that. The car was creeping along now. Still, Charles did not turn. If any harm had come to Julie, if he had so much as touched her, if he had... Then the headlights swung wide toward the center of the road, and with a spurt of speed the car made an arc around Charles and proceeded swiftly down the road. He saw a man and woman in the front seat, heads twisted around in curiosity. The woman's glasses glinted in the lights of the dashboard. In time, the red taillights disappeared, and Charles relaxed the grip on the gun. He plodded on, disappointed, angry. Would he use the gun? That was the question left echoing in his mind. If it is that twist-minded boy with the long hair and the sneer, if it turns out to be that child, no older than Julie herself, could you do it? Charles's mind twisted away from the challenge, but at the same time he was aware of a strange new strength all through him. He moved on, covering ground, planting each foot carefully, ignoring the pain. There were no houses, only an occasional closed service station or roadside restaurant, the shadows of familiar billboards with their inane, ingratiating legends urging him to buy this new car, that shaving cream, to see this movie. These were echoes from a world he had left behind now, a world of order and security and serenity and, yes, illusion. Illusion because the security was false. It could be smashed by the ring of a telephone any day, any night. He knew this now, and his stomach rebelled, knotting at the thought. The police were also a part of that normal world, and Charles had excluded the police himself, having already suffered the doubt that he should have informed them when he did. He now had to face the simple fact that perhaps he should be using their help now. This uncertainty gnawed at him, and he could feel now, under the heavy overcoat, the cold damp of perspiration down his back. If he did anything wrong now, if he himself made the wrong decision at any single point, what of the future then? Who would then be to blame for what happened? Charles choked down the fiery knot in his throat. Damn it. He had made that decision, and he could not continue to go back over it in his mind. This hesitation, this vacillation had been the curse of his life. He had no idea where it came from, but it had been, always, the source of his greatest dissatisfaction. Tonight, facing Helen, he had finally said what there was to say. He had finally spoken out. Whereas in the past he had stood by. He had watched helplessly as the gulf widened between his wife and his daughter. No, in honesty he had helped, by not speaking out, by not taking a stand, to widen the gulf. Loving them both, secretly understanding, and yet shying from a recognition of that understanding, he had taken no firm stand. All the while he had despised this helplessness, this lack of manliness in himself. Yes, that's what it was. He had been reluctant to acknowledge it in the past, but now... Well, tonight he had made up his mind, hadn't he? And he had told Helen exactly what to do and what not to do. This had hurt her, and he had seen and acknowledged the hurt. Had in fact somewhat shared it, as usual with her, but he had not altered his course. Now, striding along the dark highway, head down, hands jammed into pockets, back on fire, legs aching fiercely, he was looking backward in his mind, and looking backward prevented his looking ahead. He could not look ahead. He dared not look ahead. He had never really known how much he loved his daughter until tonight. Until now. Did it always take something like this for a man to realize? Now, when it might be too late? The terrible burden of guilt and responsibility and apprehension dragged his steps. He felt hollow and sick, and at the same time packed clear through with hatred and rage and rebellion. Headlights again flooded the road, this time in front of him. He did not miss a step, forcing his head higher now, setting his jaw until a slow pain crept up the side of his face. The police? Had Helen done what he had demanded? The approaching car slowed slightly as it passed. Then it was gone. A green sedan with one person half visible inside. Charles did not turn around. That car that had almost stopped in front of the house earlier, hadn't that also been a green sedan? 3:52. "I'm not going to ask you now, I'm telling you," Charles had said. "No matter what you think, no matter how you feel yourself or what you believe, if the police come here, you are not to tell them where I've gone." These words had been going through Helen's mind ever since the police, along with Phil, white-faced and apologetic, and Mr. Stoddard, silent and bewildered-looking, had arrived 10 minutes ago. All the time they had been questioning her, 4 of them, their faces moving in and out of focus like floating heads in a blurred bad dream, Helen had clung stubbornly to her lie. They had received several telephone calls. She described them as best she could, and Mr. Elgin had left without telling her where he was going. As to anything else, she did not know. The police, some in uniform and some wearing street clothes, had chided, rebuked, begged, whispered, finally shouted. Still, Helen would say no more. They had pointed out then, one after the other, for what seemed like hours, the danger she was letting her husband in for. And finally, one of them, she wasn't even sure which one of the blurred faces, had said bluntly, "What's the matter? Don't you love your daughter?" It was then that Helen had reached out and slammed a palm across the strange man's face, herself astonished at the sound, the amazement on his face, the sting against her hand. After that, the police had been concentrating in 2 separate groups on Phil and Mr. Stoddard on the other side of the room. Helen was not sure now, and had not been sure then, that she was doing the proper thing. The police might be right. In some deep recess of her heart, Helen suspected that they were, and this suspicion filled her with a sickening apprehension. Still, she had lifted her chin and refused. Why? Because Charles had told her to. Because she must trust her husband. Because finally she did actually trust him. Helen sat now huddled in a corner, not listening to the questions the police were hurling at poor shriveled Mr. Stoddard, not looking at the radio and other equipment around the house, or at the huge black guns. She felt detached from the constant coming and going. The unlighted Christmas tree was like a remnant from another time, another year. Helen, otherwise numb, could look back on Christmas morning only a few days ago as if she were gazing back nostalgically on a time forever gone and lost. And like a knife turning in her chest, the memory of her life flooded her. And she was able to see then, in a bright and terrible instant, how, because of weakness, of anger, of imagined hurts and insults and small cruelties, that life had been blighted and shadowed. Blighted because it was unrealized. Shadowed because none of them, not a one of them, had ever realized the great, good, living thing they had here, in this very room, its warmth and color and charm and beauty. Now, looking back on something gone, she could see, and the vision struck her dumb. She had to talk to Julie. She had to get to Julie, now, herself, now before something awful did happen, now before it was too late. She had to take Julie's head in her lap. She had to whisper the words that neither said to the other, the words that she had not considered saying. Helen let her head drop into her hands. It was too late. Touched by the certain knowledge of time and mortality, Helen began to cry. She wept so softly that no one else in the room was aware of it. Julie. Julie, who had lived here for 17 years. Helen felt the tears blazing hot on her cheeks. I don't even know her, she told herself. My own daughter, and I don't really know her. How can this be? If anything happens to you, Julie, if anything happens to you, I will die. It's as simple as that, Julie. I will die. And not for the first time, Helen began to pray silently. It was for this reason that it took a long moment for Helen to realize that something was happening in the room. She lifted her head at the sound of loud voices. Mr. Stoddard was standing in the center of the room, pushing his glasses up his nose with one finger, His other hand clenched into a fist. His face was purplish red, his eyes bulging. He did not look like the same meek, lonely, and unhappy man who a few seconds before had been peering up at the police in innocence and misery, eager to answer their questions, eager to please. Now he shouted, glaring, and Helen could make out only a few words. "Made me tell you. Know what you're thinking. Not true. Lots of kids got knives. Call his friends. Lots of kids have knives like that today. Know what you're thinking. It ain't true. It ain't true. It ain't true, I tell you. Nolan wouldn't do something like this. He's my boy. You got no right to jump to conclusions like that. I don't give a damn who you are. I'll take on any man in this room says my son's got anything to do with this. Who wants to try it first?" And seeing him, hearing the word knife, its meaning reaching her, knowing now that Charles had been right in this too, with all this racing through her mind, Helen still felt a swift surge of pity for Mr. Stoddard. The police turned away one by one, not out of fear, but themselves affected, as though the plight and misery of this single man standing there touched some secret nerve or fear in each of them. In that long moment of silence after Mr. Stoddard's outburst, Helen felt a quick urge to stand up and reach out to the man. When he staggered blindly, all fighting seeping away toward her corner, she rose and pushed her chair forward, and Mr. Stoddard, frowning into her face a split second, sat down. Helen turned and faced the room. Several of the men looked away from her too, but in Phil Reynolds' face, Helen caught a glimpse of something akin to admiration or love. Mr. Stoddard was saying softly to no one in particular, "He was a happy kid. When he was little, you couldn't ask for a happier kid." 3:55. Nolan felt light-hearted, even gay. It was like those times when he was a kid, everything ahead, everything filled with the bright promise of things to come. Now that he was alone again, driving with the window open and the cold air clearing his head, although not completely, he felt slightly giddy and light-headed. Now that she wasn't so close, now that he wasn't so quiveringly conscious of her presence, he could think again. He could get himself back on track. In the beginning, when he had made the first phone call, he hadn't had any idea where he was going, how one thing would lead to the next. But along the way, the plan had fallen into place in his mind, and he had been able to put it all together and remember what was important. Getting that money and getting away, once and for all. And that Julie, damn her. She had almost thrown him off the track. He had gotten pretty confused back there in the clubhouse, not even knowing himself what he was going to do from one minute to the next. But not now. Not anymore. All he had to do now was turn around and drive back to her old man, who was trudging along back there on the highway just the way he had been told, almost to the river road leading to the lake now. Nolan had passed the stiff figure 3 times without stopping. Once, just to make sure, he had slowed down, coming almost to a halt, then moved on, watchful and alert. But Elgin wasn't being followed. There was no sign of the police, or even of another car. And then the question dropped into his mind again. He could no longer fight it off. Are you going back to Julie? After you have the dough? When you ought to be on your way as fast as possible? Are you going back? Nolan went fiery hot all over. Damn it, the plan was all set. It was all working, wasn't it? Elgin would hand over the money. Then they'd find the girl. Some way they'd find her, sure. And once her old man and his old man got together and realized what had happened and that Julie hadn't been touched or hurt, well, her old man had dropped the charges rather than have people ask what might have happened, making up their own minds anyway. And his old man would be stuck for the dough and the car. One thing his old man wouldn't want, couldn't take, would be the police going after his own son. You can't go back to that damn lake club, Nolan told himself. The scheme was working itself out even better than he had planned when he had started, and he couldn't let anything foul it up, that's all. Nothing, not even Julie. She had tried, hadn't she? You're going to prison, Nolan. You'll go to prison, maybe worse. Well, he wasn't scared. Nolan turned around, making a U-turn on the highway, whipping the wheel viciously, listening with pleasure to the protesting screech of brakes. That wasn't the way she had tried. What she had done was to get him mixed up, looking the way she did, helpless and lost, and yet her eyes sparkling with defiance and spirit, and her body soft and hot under his hand when he had rolled her over to tie her ankles, and The faint, delicate flower fresh smell. To hell with all that. Forget it. All he had had, though, were those 2 crummy kisses. That's all. He could still feel the softness, the ungiving, firm softness of Julie's lips. He could still taste the 2 kisses. Regret moved flame-like through his mind. Maybe he should have played it both ways. They can only hang a guy once, as the man says. Then why didn't you? Drank too much too fast. That was one reason. Like hell. It was that old lady's voice on the phone, that was it. Did you ever hear anybody yell like that? Did you ever hear anything like it in your life? She sounded like an animal, some wild animal. The echo of that woman's cry resounding in his brain. It suggested not the rage of one woman, but the combined and terrifying fury of all people everywhere, always, to a crime such as... He had not committed any crime, not yet, not any real crime. He could see again the figure of the man far down the road. Elgin was doing just what Nolan had told him to do. Scared rabbit. It was all working out fine, and he could be damn glad that something, he still didn't know what it was, had stopped him from going too far back there at the clubhouse. Now, no matter what happened, she couldn't say he had done anything but scare her. Only you won't see her again now, his mind taunted. He eased 1 foot down on the brake pedal. Not unless this guy starts something. Not unless he tries to pull something. If that happens, she gets it. She gets it, and it won't be my fault. The green sedan slowed down beside Charles Elgin, who stopped walking and turned to peer into the car. "Hello, Mr. Elgin," Nolan said, grinning. As soon as Charles saw the face, he had to break a wild, sudden, overwhelming impulse. He had to prevent his hand from coming from his pocket with the gun. This was the car that had passed him 3 times, twice approaching and 1 from behind. Now that he was looking into the face of young Stoddard, the whole nightmare impossibility of the situation struck Charles full force. He had to compel himself then to remember that boys of this age today were capable of man-sized crime, or worse. Not all, thank God, but a few. A few like this one. Controlling his voice, Charles said, "Where is Julie?" "I'll take the money," young Stoddard was saying quietly. "You'll take me to Julie first," Charles said then, evenly, not loud, but in such a way that the boy blinked as though he had not thought of this possibility, had not prepared himself for it. "When I see that Julie's all right, you get the money." They were held then, the man outside the car, the boy across the seat from him inside the car, both still and frozen with the wind whipping at Charles's coat. In that instant, Charles realized that he had been right from the beginning. This boy was capable of anything. Anything. Finally, the boy pulled his eyes away, twisting his head to look behind, slammed a palm against the steering wheel, whispered, "Ought to take it from you. Ought to... Charles, his hand, gripping the loaded gun in his pocket, prayed, "Don't make me use it. Don't make me show him I have it. Don't let something happen now." Aloud, he said, "If Julie's all right, you'll get the money. It's in my pocket." Nolan waited a split second longer, glancing nervously into the rearview mirror, then leaned over and opened the car door. Charles climbed in without taking his right hand from his pocket. Nolan gunned the motor and the car shot forward, the tires screeching, and in a few 100 yards it turned left onto the road along the river leading to the lake. Nolan rolled up his window then, driving carelessly with one hand while Charles fixed his eyes on him. In the closed car, Nolan's breath reached Charles and turned his stomach. So the boy was drunk, too. What this might mean, what the drunkenness might already have prompted, Charles did not dare consider now. The car was moving beside the river. On the left were a few cottages, all dark, some with small docks reaching into the dark water. Charles's hand was wet around the gun. He hated this boy with a bitterness in his mouth, a tightness in his chest, a flame in his stomach. He hated him completely, profoundly. It didn't matter what made him, how he had come to be as he was, whether it was his fault or his father's or the world's. Charles loathed him. And if it came to it, he would kill him. At this thought, Charles's mind balked. Perhaps not. He was, after all, only a child, Julie's age. Could Charles kill him? In silence he prayed, "Please, God, don't make me ever find the answer to that question." Nolan slowed down the car. Panic had settled in. Any fear he had ever known before was wild, sudden, violent. But this now, whatever it was, this was quiet, every muscle and nerve unmoving, not taut but incapable of action. It was like being smothered in a cloud that moved in your mouth and in your chest and stomach all through you, holding you, suffocating you. What could he do with old man Elgin? The knife. What good would that do? This guy didn't even look scared, just sore. But with the money this close, right in the car, $3,000, more money than he had ever... "How do I know you've got the dough?" Nolan heard him ask, without stuttering. "You don't. When I see Julie, you'll know." The car was crawling now. What this jerk Elgin didn't realize was that if he gave him the money now, it would all be over. Julie was safe. He wanted to shout, "Julie is safe, you damn fool!" It was kind of funny when you look at it this way. Old man Elgin was only carrying it on himself, making it rough on himself, on everybody. "What if I told you where she was?" Charles Elgin shook his head. "Okay, you get it." The panic exploded. The cloud was gone. Nolan had decided. "Okay, you get it, you bastard. You could have had it easy, now it's going to be hard." "Take me to Julie," Charles Elgin said. Nolan snorted. A vast pressure had been relieved deep inside. The joy was coming back. The excitement. He had never felt more alive. Never. It was all clear now. First he'd get rid of this guy. One way or the other, he didn't care how. Then he'd get the dough. And then he'd get back to Julie by himself. Julie. Yes, he was going back to Julie now. He felt relieved at that, too. Elgin had taken the decision away from him. It was all Elgin's fault now. Whatever happened from here on, Elgin could just blame himself. The action Nolan had been longing for was almost upon him. He felt the moments race by. He pressed his elbow against his jacket pocket. The knife was still there. "Okay, you asked for it," Nolan's mind screamed. "Okay, you get it. You and Julie, too." 4:01. Julie's wrists and ankles were bruised and torn where the silken cord had cut into flesh. Cold had settled into every nerve and fiber of her body. But her mind was fiercely alive. She had maneuvered herself, crab-like, across the floor to the glass that Nolan had smashed. She was now lying behind the bar. She was no longer crying. The tears, shed for someone else, had somehow released her from a long darkness of bitterness and resentment. In the past 20 minutes she had moved, at least part way, painfully, down the long and unknowable road to adulthood. She had also caught a glimpse of the wild, sweet promise of life. And all the while conscious of the apprehension and fear that her parents must be living through, praying that Phil was home and asleep and unknowing, she was determined to free herself. As to what might be in store for her personally, if Nolan came back, this was only a flicker now along the edges of consciousness. Julie's fingers fumbled, searching and probing among the glass slivers and grit on the floor. She could not be certain, but it seemed to her that her thinking of the last 20 minutes or so had given her strength. In that time she had looked back on her life and viewed herself through her parents' eyes. It had been an ordeal of anguish, with her mind trying to dodge away from the unpleasant pictures. It was no wonder, and this was the terrible conclusion she could not avoid, it was no wonder they did not love her as they loved Rod. She could not blame them, she could not blame Rod. She could only blame herself. Her hand located the heavy base of the tumbler, round with jagged edges. She clutched it, maneuvering it with her fingers until she was certain the edge was against the cord which bound her wrists. She moved it steadily against the cord. In a way, it was a relief to blame no one but herself. Julie felt this now all through her tensed, straining body, in her clenched, concentrated mind. It was a relief to reach this bitter knowledge. She had been wrong to demand love for love's sake, without giving. Who was she to demand that anyone, her parents, Phil, anyone, love her even when she was determined to be unlovable? It did no good ever to place the blame outside yourself, because the only possible change had to come from within. A sweet joy came to her, a fresh strength. As she increased the pressure of her fingers, the round, sharp glass slipped. At first she thought only that she had dropped it. Then she felt the hot blood in her palm. And only after that did the pain reach her, burning and twisting, first in the gritty crevice of the wound, then in the wrist, and finally moving slowly, inexorably up her arm. She went momentarily sick. She heard herself, and with some surprise, utter a small cry. She was suddenly overwhelmed by an old hopelessness. She rested her head against the floor. The old sense of desertion returned. She closed her eyes, her cheek against the cold floor. Her own blood moved damply, hotly against her back, soaking through the gown. What was the use? It had all been her fault, true. She was not going back on that, but this thought now only made her feel more alone, more deserted. She could not blame them for not coming, but loneliness swept her, leaving her cold and hollow. She strained to listen. Not a sound. Nothing. If only she could sleep now. Drift off. Forget. With a violent wrenching of will, she rolled over, sat up. No! Her hand fumbled frantically for the piece of glass, found it, began anew to saw away at the cord. She could not give up now. If no one else was doing anything, and she thought this now without the familiar condemnation, then she would have to get free on her own. It was then that, at first unbelieving, she felt the cord begin to unravel. A few wet threads moved spider-like over her hand as she continued to move the shard of glass against the heavy cord. She had come this far. She had learned so much. She couldn't give up now. End of Section 6. Section 7. 404. For 3 minutes, Nolan's mind had been wildly battering inside his skull. He was going crazy if he didn't do something.
Okay, you asked for it, mister. Okay, you get it. And right now, you bastard.
He slammed on the brakes. The rear end of the car skittered toward the woods that lined one side of the narrow road. Nolan didn't care. Smash it up. Anything. To hell with it. But the car finally stopped, headed slightly into the woods at an angle. On the other side of the road between them and the water was a small riverside cottage, dark, shuttered. Nolan had the knife in his hand, but still in his jacket pocket as he climbed out. His nerves were leaping. He waited as the old man Elgin got out, came around, joined him in the dimness, eyes raking the cottage expectantly. Nolan felt like laughing then.
She ain't inside, mister.
But at the same time he wanted to smash the man down, stomp the bulldog determination off his face. He motioned Elgin along the stone path leading to the cottage.
What are you going to do now?
He demanded of himself.
What now?
And all the time the violence was rising inside.
All you want is the dough, his mind was saying harshly. If he got the money, nothing was going to happen. He had to make sure of that. That was part of the plan.
He knew, though, that this rather large man with the smoldering, angry eyes would not give him the money without a struggle. How, then? How? The urgency was nagging at him. The knife. Sure, the knife. He'd scare it out of the guy. But scare, that's all. If you use that knife, he warned himself. If you use it. At the rear of the cottage, a boat dock extended into the dark water. At the end of the dock was a small boathouse, closed in, windowless. Nolan grinned. This was better than he had hoped.
She's in there,
he said, pointing, and then watched Elgin run the length of the dock, his heels clicking over the water, echoing up and down the silent river. Nolan waited until the man reached the door of the boathouse. Then he followed, not running, but with the knife ready, unopened but ready, in his hand. He saw Elgin try the door, which did not budge. Then he saw Elgin turn, so he moved in closer, quickly, snapping the knife so that the blade gleamed in the dimness. Nolan relished briefly the look of astonishment on the man's face, and, stirred by some impulse almost too great to break, he thought for a split second that he was going to move in, slashing with the knife in just the way he had moved in and knocked Julie out on the highway. But instead he heard himself say,
"Just give me the dough, mister. That's all."
He heard Elgin mutter only one word. It was his daughter's name. Then Nolan saw Elgin step toward him despite the knife, and then he saw a movement in the area of the man's pockets. He saw a hand emerge, and then he was not sure what he saw because it was the one thing he had never considered. It was not part of the scheme. It couldn't happen like this. In the semi-darkness, though, he was fairly certain that Elgin had a gun in his hand. Nolan's mind went blank then. His throat closed. His heart went dead. His first impulse was to turn and run, but the panic, fear, and rage were too much, conflicting. So he moved forward instead, lifting the knife at the same moment. He felt it strike the barrel of the gun, not flesh of hand, and his whole body braced then for the impact of the bullet. But it did not come, so he kicked, hard and fast, and saw the man stagger backwards to the edge of the dock. Two arms came up and out, grasping air for support, and then the whole large body plunged backwards into the dark water. Stunned, Nolan watched, hearing the splash. For a moment he could not move. He heard a thrashing about in the water, unbreathing, still not believing any of it. How did he get into this? How did this come about, anyway? He forced himself to move. Then he was running down the dock, around the cottage, back to the car. He could still hear the splashing behind. Let him die. Let him drown. Let him die. It was not until he was in the car, fumbling for the key, that Nolan realized that the money was still in Elgin's pockets. If there was any money. If there ever had been. The whole incredible nightmare engulfed him. He felt again that he was about to suffocate. And then he discovered that the keys were not in place on the dashboard. Frantic then, hearing the distant water movements subside, he hoped he was dead. He hoped the body was lifeless under the dirty water. Nolan searched through his pockets, discovered in amazement that one hand was still clutching the open, useless knife. But he did not find the keys. It made no sense. Nothing made sense. He rested his head on the wheel. Now what? Where? Julie. It was a cry in his heart. An odd tenderness swept him. He would go to Julie. He had never felt so alone. He would go to Julie, and afterwards, he would kill her. Rage set in. It was her fault anyway. If it hadn't been for Julie, he wouldn't be in this. Damn her anyway. He clawed at the door handle, leaped out. He started running down the road, his mind automatically thinking ahead to the turn of the road where river joined lake. And then, abruptly, he turned and plunged into the woods along the right side of the road. The hill rose before him. All he had to do was climb that rise of hill to the crest, turn sharply left, follow the ridge to the lake club. It would be a lot faster and safer. Nothing was going to stop him now. Damn her anyway. Damn her. He'd watched her long enough. He'd held off long enough. If he got nothing else out of this, if he got nothing else. He was between the dark trees now, using his arms and hands to drag himself upwards, his legs catching and slipping on the hard frozen earth, using the trunks as posts to pull himself up. He was going to make it. Everything else had gone wrong. Everything else had turned on him. But Julie was still there, and only he knew it. Only he. Behind him, but some distance away, he heard the sound of a car motor. He stopped, holding his breath, which was a pain in his chest. He turned and looked down the hill. Only faintly between the trees a light shone, headlights, and in the utter stillness he heard the motor clearly. It was the motor of his father's car. Now the nightmare was complete. This was not true. This was impossible. This was not happening. He leaned against a tree, drawing in the thin, unsteady air, the astonishment draining him. How did he get into this? What happened? What happened? And for the first time that night, but much too late, he thought of his bed in the rear section of the drugstore. He thought of his bed in those cramped and ugly rooms, and he saw in them not their cramped ugliness at all, but warmth and a place for him. He could see his father's face. As in the distance he heard the car move forward, and he longed to see that face, now, this instant, because he felt somehow that if only his father knew about this, or could appear here now, everything would be all right. You don't have time, his mind urged. You don't have time." And then he realized that the car was moving in the direction of the lake. Elgin was probably searching for him. Well, let him look. Nolan turned and began to climb again, faster now. No matter what else, he'd get to Julie first. Even if Elgin, and maybe it wasn't Elgin driving that car, was heading for the club, which was pretty unlikely, Nolan would get there first. He'd get to Julie first now, no matter what. At least he'd have that much out of it. And afterwards, he'd kill her. What difference did it make? If they caught him now, one crime was like the next. Kidnapping, murder. What difference? They weren't going to cheat him out of everything. He felt sick and hopeless, and as he reached the top of the hill, his rage turned outwards. It'd be a way of getting back at all of them. The whole lot of them. His way. 4:08. Phil was staring out the picture window of the Elgins' living room. Behind him, the police were still at work. They had been receiving reports from the city police, the state police, the sheriff's office. The FBI was giving instructions, and 2 special agents were on their way and would arrive in a few minutes. Phil was aware of all of this, but there were brief moments when he thought that he would have to plunge through the window himself, climb into his car, drive off. Somebody had to do something. At least twice he had made attempts to get out, without having any clear idea as to where he might go. But each time the police officers had stopped him, and the last time one of them had reminded him unnecessarily that if it hadn't been for him, none of them would be here at all, in this fix, and next time he had better bring his girlfriend home. Phil had, because of the mounting tension inside, tried to take a swing at that particular officer, but had been prevented by 2 others. Now he was being carefully watched, so he stood staring, seething and helpless, out across the frozen lake at the growing cluster of police cars in the street. In the window, he could, by darting only his eyes in that direction, see Mr. Stoddard reflected behind him. At first Phil had looked on Mr. Stoddard as if he were Nolan. He hadn't been able to glance at him without revealing the venom he felt toward any and all Stoddards. But now, after this long a time, he was unable to look at the man at all. Poor guy. Just to look at him, you knew. He was still trying to deny that his boy had anything to do with this, but Phil suspected that the knowledge had penetrated. Mr. Stoddard, deep within, knew. Phil couldn't bear to look at that drained, sagging face, with the eyes hostile and red and knowing behind the steel-rimmed glasses. Now the police were questioning Mrs. Elgin again. Once before, when Phil had attempted to protest, the chief had pointed out with cool logic that he wasn't doing any of this for fun, after all. And now again he was saying the same thing to Mrs. Elgin. He was only doing this for her own good. He only hoped to help her and her husband and her daughter. He realized she would not cooperate by telling where her husband had gone. Perhaps she honestly didn't know. But now here was Mr. Hopkins to talk to her. Mr. Hopkins, he explained, was state's attorney. Mr. Hopkins was very quiet, very gentle. He asked her about each call, one by one. When he reached the last call, he said he understood she had talked with her daughter personally. Mrs. Elgin must have nodded, because then Mr. Hopkins went on.
"She told you she was all right?"
"Yes."
"How did she tell you that? Her words, if you can remember them."
"I can't. I was too... You must..."
"I understand, of course. As a matter of fact, one of the officers has told me you said your daughter used a very odd phrase. The officer was inclined to think the girl may have had 1 or 2 too many drinks."
Phil turned around. Mrs. Elgin had lifted and set her chin, and her eyes were blazing into Mr. Hopkins' face.
"Julie was not drunk,"
she said evenly, low but every syllable heard throughout the room.
"Julie does not drink."
"Mrs. Elgin, I don't believe so either. But she did say she was having a good time, didn't she? Now, some of the men here believe, after some investigation, that this whole thing might be some sort of trick. Perhaps you can explain. Why would your daughter tell you she was having a good time?"
Mrs. Elgin snapped.
"Julie didn't say that. She said she was all right. I don't understand it myself. She said, if you're not having a good time, go home. But she was not drunk. You'll never convince me Julie would do something like..."
But Phil heard no more.
In his stomach, something had turned completely over. If you're not having a good time, go home. He felt a coldness move down his body. He stepped to Mr. Hopkins, who turned frowning, more curious than impatient at the interruption. Phil saw Mrs. Elgin stand up. He had to make up his mind quickly, and he had to do what he thought best, whether it coincided with Mrs. Elgin's idea or not. His mouth was dry and his throat locked. "Well?" Mr. Hopkins said. Phil was gazing at Mrs. Elgin. He might still be wrong. Perhaps the police could not help. Still. "I know where Julie is," he said. 4:10. Charles was behind the wheel of the green sedan that young Stoddard had been driving. He was sitting in a pool of icy water. His coat clung coldly to him, and his whole body was stiff. But he was bent over the wheel, eyes alert, raking the road from side to side, darting upwards into the woods on his right and then along the scrub growth and around the cottages on his left. The boy could have concealed himself anywhere, and Julie could be locked in any of those cottages. Charles himself was packed solid with cold rage. He had to find that boy. He had to kill him. At the same time, as his grim, silent search continued, Charles began to think that perhaps he had better turn and go back and find a phone. There would be no phones along this road, or after he turned along the lake road either, but the boy had to be here somewhere, and on foot. If Charles could only reach the boy before the boy reached Julie. "Julie, Julie, where are you?" Charles touched the gun, which lay beside him on the seat. It was a miracle he still had the gun. When he had come up from the water back there, shocked and numb almost into unconsciousness, he had had only one thought: to get back to the dock. At the same time, he had thought that, wearing the coat, he was done for. He had fought his way to air over and over, thrashing about, flailing wildly until the deep, solid voice of reason stopped him, and then he had begun to tread water, listening to the boy's wild footsteps as he escaped. And after that he had swum, fighting down panic and the impulse to speed, until finally he had drawn himself, dripping and spent, up onto the dock. It was not until he was standing there, gasping for breath, that he realized that, like a fool, he had continued to grasp the gun, and that it was still clutched in his hand. Then he had moved on soggy shoes toward the car. The door was wide open. The road was deserted. A strange, wild triumph had risen in Charles then, as he looked at the deserted car. His hand went down into the clinging cloth of the coat pocket and emerged with the key. He could feel it wet and sharp between his fingers. It was really funny when you thought about that key. He had, on impulse, reached for it as he climbed out of the car, back there when young Stoddard had stood pointing to the cottage as though Julie might be inside. The boy hadn't seen the brief action. Now, easing the car along the shadowed road, Charles thought with pleasure of that moment when Nolan must have realized that he no longer had the key to his own car. Charles wished he could have seen the boy's twisted, astonished face at that moment. By this time, Charles Elgin had thrown off all hesitation. He was completely convinced, with a black bitterness clogging his mouth, that when and if the time came, he would kill young Stoddard without hesitation. Without, in fact, the same brief hesitation he had experienced back there on the dock. It was that split-second uncertainty on his part that had allowed the boy to push him into the water, and Charles hated himself for having hesitated. He should have shot at once, even through the cloth of the coat. Next time. Next time. He flipped off the headlights and proceeded into the dimness slowly. His jaw was set. His eyes moved from side to side. There was always the possibility, of course, that young Stoddard, after realizing that the car was useless to him, had turned and headed back toward the main highway and perhaps town. If so, Charles was wasting time, and it might be dangerous. "Julie, Julie, where are you?" Still, since the boy had turned down this road at once, since he had played that trick here, Charles was convinced that Julie was somewhere in this area. He could be wrong. If he was wrong, of course. He stopped the car, killed the motor. He eased open the door. Darkness surrounded him. He listened. The wind sighed a moment, then crackled in the winter branches of the trees on the hillside. Otherwise, silence. Charles's teeth were chattering. What if he had made a fool mistake? What if? And it was then that he had to face the simple possibility that by the time he reached Julie, perhaps even by now, she would not be alive. That boy was capable of anything, and he might easily have killed her first, then come to meet Charles to get the money. It's too much, Charles decided then. It's too much. He needed help. He had not been wrong all along. If the police had been following him on that road, for instance, young Stoddard would not have stopped. But now there were too many directions, too many ways for the boy to run. He started the motor. He had to get to a phone. He couldn't handle this alone, not now. The one reason he had tried to keep the police away, the fear that they might panic the sick mind, was now gone. That twisted mind had been already triggered into action. At the point where river met lake, Charles turned onto the lake road with the idea of turning around and heading back to town. Then he recalled the telephone at the lake club. It wasn't far down the lake road. Certainly the club was much nearer than the highway at the far end of the river road. And since it was the week between Christmas dinner dance and the New Year's Eve dance, the phone would be connected. But, of course, if it wasn't, it would mean more time lost. If you're not having a good time, go home. Charles threw the car into forward gear. His mind was racing now, and he felt the first small warmth deep in his stomach. If you're not having a good time, go home. And then he knew. He was absolutely certain. He cursed himself. Julie had tried to tell him on the phone, in the only way she had, and he had been so perplexed and astonished, seeing Helen weeping, actually weeping, that he had ignored what Julie had said. There were always so many elements all at the same time. A man couldn't think of everything. Then, with the urgency of still another thought knifing at him, he tramped on the accelerator. If young Stoddard had not used the road, if he had climbed the hill through the woods and struck out toward the clubhouse. Charles bent forward over the wheel as if to urge the car forward through the darkness. He did not flip on the lights. No use warning the boy if he was already there, or startling him. There was a pain in his chest now. He had wasted time. He had wasted time. He had to get there first. One hand reached out, touched the gun on the seat. The fingers came away wet. And a horrible question churned to the surface of Charles's whirling mind. Would a wet gun fire? 4:13. Nolan was running in circles. At first, when he realized that somehow he had lost all sense of direction at the top of the hill, he decided to keep his head and work out which way he had come. Then, if he could only manage that, all he had to do then would be to turn left toward the lake. But after a time he realized that he was trotting, sometimes smashing into trees, sometimes staggering. He had turned an ankle which was hurting, but he was able to ignore that because he knew that if he did not get out of the woods, he would die. He could not get his breath, and by this time, 2 hours, he supposed, after his first phone call to the old man Elgin, he was certain that he would never get out of the woods. Never, never, never. 4:15. 3 police cars, sirens wailing, turned off Highway 41 into the riverside road leading to the lake. Phil drove his own car, following at a great speed. Beside him, Mrs. Elgin sat stiff and silent. On the other side of her, Mr. Hopkins looked ahead at the flashing red lights of the police cars. In one of those cars, Phil knew, Mr. Stoddard sat crumpled and forlorn, his eyes also not looking ahead. Phil had no doubts. All that concerned him at the moment was the simple fact that, on the treacherous pavements, one of the cars in front might spin, causing further delay. 4:16. For a brief moment, but only for that length of time, Nolan decided that a miracle had occurred. In that instant, one thought went tearing fire-like through his mind. Julie. He had emerged from the woods. Not only was he out, with no trees towering over him, hemming him in from all sides, but he was standing, it had to be a miracle, beside the large parking area of the lake club. The building itself loomed, dark and silent, at the end of the parking area. Stunned, wiping his face where branches had torn at the flesh, swiping hot, piercing lashes across nose and cheek and forehead, he realized that across that snow-banked open space, behind the door he himself had smashed, was Julie. He'd have that. At least he'd have that. And at the same time, the idea of murder stirred again in his stomach. He pictured the knife plunging over and over. The thought sent him running, limping, the ankle shooting lances of pain up his leg and into his groin. He was halfway across the parking lot when the headlights stabbed at him. He stopped. It wasn't true. This was not happening. Where had they come from? He was facing the car, blinded by the lights. He hadn't even heard a motor. He could not see beyond the lights. He heard a door open. Slam. 4:17. Inside the clubhouse, Julie had been listening, and when she heard the sound of an approaching motor, she had tried to force her mind to remember, to reveal whether this was the motor of the green sedan that Nolan had been driving. But she had not been able to do it, even when she heard the car make the turn into the driveway, heard it stop in the parking area, saw the abrupt flare of lights across the ceiling and through the windows. The cord around her wrists still had not given way completely. She still lay helpless on the floor, but she had to know now. She had to know. She dropped the blood-wet round of glass, and, using her cut knuckles for support behind her body, she sat up, inched her way backwards to the wall. Pushing with all the strength left in her body, she worked her way slowly upwards with her back against the wall. She was almost upright when she heard the voice. The voice was calling her name. Julie was afraid to believe it. "Julie!" the voice cried, but faintly through the thick window. "Julie, are you in there?" And even before she was able to turn her body to look out, she recalled the unlikely, incredible sound of her mother's weeping on the phone. Because of that quick memory, she recognized the voice. It was her father's. She looked out the window. The headlights of the green sedan, she recognized that car in the first instant, were burning into the night. A shadowy hulk stood at the edge of the light, one hand holding to the side of the car, features obscured, wariness in the stance, and the other hand pointing a black gun. Julie opened her mouth. No sound came. She was gazing now across the expanse of gravel parking area, following the white glaring stab of headlight beams. Frozen, somewhat off-center with the knife gleaming in his dangling hand, standing like a broken toy of a human being, was Nolan. "I'm here," she heard a voice cry, knowing it for her own, yet uncertain. "Dad, I'm here." "Are you alone, Julie?"
"Yes."
And while she watched, Nolan made a move, a slight forward step. Her eyes darted to her father. The gun came up. She could not hear the words, but she knew her father was speaking. She could even see the small puffs of steam from between his lips. It didn't matter what he was saying. He was here. He had come. After all she had done to both of them, they had wept and they had come. Julie felt humility for perhaps the first time in her life. Humility and gratitude. And she rested her forehead against the cold, steaming window to watch. No, she wanted to shout in reply to her father's last question. "No, I am not alone. I will never be really alone again." But at that moment, Nolan took a solid full step forward, glancing toward the clubhouse, the knife glinting. 4:18. "I don't want to kill you, boy," Charles was saying, keeping the figure framed within range of the barrel of the unfamiliar gun. "But if you start toward that door over there, I'm going to do it." And all the time a mocking voice in his mind inquired, "Are you? Will a gun that has been submerged in water fire?" The Stoddard boy's face twisted, whether from indecision or pain, Charles could not know. Has the boy thought of the wetness of the gun? If so, mightn't he make a run for it anyway? Sure enough, Nolan's leg went forward slowly. "Julie!" Charles shouted. "Get away from the window!" She had been through enough. He could not let her see this. "You hear me?" There was no reply, but somehow Charles knew that she had complied, just as he had somehow known in the last half hour or so that Helen had followed his orders about telling the police. "Don't make me do it, boy. You're sick. You need help. Don't make me kill you." Still, the boy said nothing, only glared with those wild animal eyes so that Charles could not even tell whether he heard the words. And deep in his consciousness, a familiar voice of doubt and hesitation demanded, "Can you kill him? He's a child. He's sick. Dangerous, yes, but sick. Can you kill him? Have you the right?" Nolan took another step, slowly, as though he didn't wish to startle Charles, but a definite movement in the direction of the clubhouse. "Stand still, you damn fool!" Charles shouted. "Stand still, I'm telling you!" And even in his voice he recognized that probing, quiet, betraying, intelligent part of himself, that weakness he hated. "Not another damn step!" Any other man, he thought, at least most other men, would have shot by now. It would be over with, and Julie would be in his arms as she should be. "Why do you hesitate? Why do you always hesitate?" "Because," he answered himself harshly. "Because, damn it. If that boy makes a break for it, if the gun won't fire, if he gets inside with that knife, even if pursued, if he gets to Julie, which seems to be all he cares about now, if that happens, everything will be lost. Everything." Charles knew little or nothing of firearms. Would a gun fire when soaking wet? That was the one idea that he must be careful not to communicate to the boy, now tensed, standing poised, ready to make a break for it. 4:19. Nolan had not missed the note of fear, the reluctance in old man Elgin's voice. Somehow, however, even though he was fairly certain of what he heard there, would the guy really pull the trigger? The sense of triumph would not come. Instead, he felt trapped. Something had gone haywire, and he couldn't understand it. What was he doing here anyway, in the middle of the night? With his ankle hurting and his head whirling and this damn light that tortured his eyes, looking at this gun. He had been trapped. He had been tricked. It was all over. He was afraid to take another step. What if the old guy did blast away? For the last 2 minutes, Nolan had felt as if any second he was going to be sick. Just collapse and be sick. It was all over except one thing. Just one thing. He was going to get her. She had been the cause of it. She was the one who brought him to this. And he was not going to be cheated now out of that one final heart-stopping pleasure, plunging the knife not once, many times, over and over. He could feel this urge building in intensity, stronger now than any other desire he had ever known. He was hot and sweating. But that damn old guy Elgin, him and that gun. Something, or someone, had always stood in the way of everything Nolan had ever really wanted. Like poison, all the hatred and bitterness of his life welled through him. Maybe he should take the step, start running. Let him fire away, get it over with. What good was anything? What was the use or point of anything? He'd never get the dough now. The dough that was probably right there in Elgin's pocket. And he'd never get away either. Then, suddenly, the whole idea of escaping as he had planned, this seemed as empty and paltry as everything else. There was only one thing to cling to now. Only one. Julie. He had to get to Julie, whom he hated, whom somehow he loved. One thing or the other. Get to Julie, or get a bullet. One or the other. It was then, as he felt the desperate impulse in his leg, that he imagined that he heard the sound far off of sirens. He saw Elgin's head lift, listening. Then silence. Now, he told himself. Now, run! You can beat that guy running, even with a busted ankle. But then he heard again, still far away but quite distinct now, the wail of approaching sirens. He spoke then for the first time. "Go on and fire, you bastard! Shoot!" "Stand still till they get here, kid. Please, don't make me do it." Suddenly, Nolan laughed. It was a short gust of breath. He had been wasting time. He had let the old guy pull a bluff. He knew why Elgin didn't want to shoot. Elgin couldn't shoot. How come he had let that slip his mind? That gun had been in the river. It wouldn't even fire. What a jerk this Elgin was. What a crummy bastard. Nolan listened to the sirens. He still had time. He'd make it inside easy. He'd get to Julie in time. He wanted to laugh, but his throat was closed tight. He saw the gun come up a fraction of an inch as Elgin guessed his intent. Without any further delay, he broke into a run. He was laughing inside. At first he was amazed at how easy his sprained ankle worked. Less painful now when he was running than when he was standing. He was moving fast, breathing easily. Nothing could stop him now. Nothing. Then something exploded in his back. His hands clutched at the air. The knife went spinning. He gulped air in a long, dead, stunned moment of disbelief, before the ear-shattering report of the gun reached him. He was on the ground with his face pressed against the harsh, cold gravel when the pain itself finally struck. It was a piercing pain that seemed to shatter his entire body. Far off, he still heard the wail of sirens. Closer, he heard the footsteps running past him, into the clubhouse, up the stairs. Then he heard a faint whimper, closer, as of a child or an animal, and he listened intently, fascinated, only to realize after everything had faded away once and then returned that the whimper was coming from inside himself. 4:28. The wail of the siren on the car ahead was persistent, but once his mind became accustomed to it and to the speed with which the 3 cars were traveling toward town, Charles was able to concentrate on the questions this Mr. Hopkins in the front seat was asking. With Julie in the rear seat between himself and Helen, nothing else mattered. He answered simply and honestly without attempting to cover anything he had done. Phil was driving, keeping up with the police cars ahead, yet stealing a glance once in a while in the rearview mirror which he had adjusted so that he could see Julie's face. Mr. Hopkins was shaking his head and saying it was certainly an unusual sort of case, but today you just didn't know what some young person was going to think up next. How could you account for any of it? The lush times, the uncertainty of the future, the A-bomb, the army? Sure, all of it. And something more, too. Something more, some failure between people. What it was, he wasn't prepared to say, of course. Well, with a sigh, he was certainly happy this had turned out as well as it did. We were just lucky, that was Mr. Hopkins' idea.
It wasn't luck, Julie said. It was Dad.
Mr. Hopkins said hastily then that he hadn't meant to take any of the credit away from anybody. That was for sure. What he had meant to say, and he was putting it badly, he was afraid, was that big things spring from small causes. A little slip here, a mistake or failure of some kind there, of which we're not even aware. And then, wham, tragedy. Take that Stoddard boy now. He was going to live all right, but he was going to suffer the rest of his life for what happened tonight, one way or the other. And as for his father, Charles was also thinking of Mr. Stoddard in the car ahead, racing to the hospital with his son's unconscious head cradled awkwardly in his lap. Charles recalled leaning into that car before they pulled away from the club. The 2 fathers had gazed at each other a long moment. Charles had intended to say something about being sorry, but Mr. Stoddard's stunned eyes had apologized first. There were no words. Their eyes asked the same question. Are these our children? Then, unable to cope with the awful memories of their separate but somehow united lives, they drew apart. Mr. Stoddard moving deeper into the world of nightmare, Charles withdrawing into the bright reality of his life. Lucky? Well, maybe that was as good a word as any. It was strange, Mr. Hopkins was saying, the way people got all twisted. Inside, that's where it happens. Strange and sad. In his business, he saw all kinds, all the time. Charles was weak and spent, but an odd excitement was running through him, too. It was as though a door had opened for him, and while he had gazed into the depths of horror, he had found also some fresh strength inside himself, and some renewal and promise. He had caught some sense of this in the way Helen had run to him, back there on the parking lot, going into his arms, clinging to him like a girl, and he had found it also in the way Julie had buried her head against him when he first reached her, mumbling something about its being her fault, something about how sorry she was. And he had found some of it in the gentle way Phil had picked Julie up in there and carried her to the waiting car. Finally, he had found it in the realization that neither he nor Helen had spoken Rod's name. Unconsciously now, as the cars sped toward the city limits, Mr. Hopkins was humming the most popular tune of the day. Charles didn't know all the words, but a few of them attached themselves to the melody. Love me, please, please. The tune seemed to awaken some thought or memory in Julie.
She lifted her bandaged, awkward hands and shoved them under Helen's arm on one side and Charles's arm on the other. Then she settled herself deeply between them, meanwhile casting a grave and somehow startlingly adult look into the rearview mirror. Julie's head went over onto her mother's shoulder. Charles looked at his wife across his daughter's head. Their eyes met. The sense of promise and renewal went through him again, and along with it the odd feeling that somehow they had been granted another chance in life. It doesn't often happen, he thought gratefully. It doesn't often happen. Why should it take something terrible like this to make it happen? End of Section 7, and end of The Hours After Midnight by Joseph Hayes. Read by Ben Tucker.